As a college athlete, supposedly at the pinnacle of health, Carrie Bennett began suffering chronic joint issues and insomnia. After her first child was born, she developed debilitating stomach pain, adrenal fatigue, and brain fog. That sounds like just like pregnancy in general, but we'll set that aside for a second. I'm saying that because my wife is pregnant with our third right now, but okay. Armed with a BS in biology, an MS in nutrition, and certifications as a personal trainer, massage therapist, and breathing coach, she still couldn't find the root of her issues. That's when she found quantum biology. Now, as an online educator, clinician, and faculty member of the Quantum Biology Collective, Carrie's mission is to teach her clients how to create a healing environment by applying quantum health strategies around light, water, electrons, and mitochondrial support. Given these tools, clients who have spent years trying to improve their health, just as Carrie did, finally experience powerful healing and lasting benefits. And if you're interested in learning more about Carrie, you can, of course, head to the show notes. Carrie, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Alec. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Yeah, I'm stoked for this, especially after chatting with your partner in crime, Sarah. We mentioned you a number of times during the episode.
Oh,
so
fun. All good stuff, I hope.
No, she was talking a lot of shit, saying you're in crime. No,
I've never met her in person, so I can't I
That's
can't do
crazy.
anything.
You haven't met her in person.
We've been trying, but
you run a podcast together. I've met her. She sat literally in that chair.
I know. I feel her essence here. No,
yeah, you feel her biofield. You feel the remnants of it. Yeah, shout out to Sarah Kleiner. That was an awesome episode. So it looks like based on your background, you were trying all of these different approaches that are in the realm of just health and fitness in general or holistic health, natural health, to become well, and they didn't seem to be working. Can you give a little bit of a background on that?
Yeah, sure. I think this has happened to a lot of us in terms of we kind of get hit with this random smattering of symptoms that become more and more debilitating. And then the traditional medical model doesn't really solve anything, right? Pharmaceuticals don't solve anything. And I dove deep into a functional medicine paradigm, but I got really sick of you have to take 10 supplements in the morning, 10 supplements at night.
It's greenwash pharmaceutical
100%.
back paradigm. It's the same thing, just supplements in place of pharmaceuticals to suppress or mask symptoms.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I experienced. And so I spent a ton of money on the functional labs. I was very strict with my diet. I was taking, tons of supplements, and yeah, I felt okay. But just as you alluded to, I didn't want to believe oh, you're a mom now, right? So this is as good as it's going to get. Suck it up. So that's when I was just there's got to be something so fundamental about human health that I'm missing. And I took a circuitous journey, right? I went from a really traditional, more medical, very much a medical-minded biology degree in undergrad to massage therapy school, which was very beautiful because it showed me the difference in mindsets, right? More Western, more Eastern. And even then, I didn't have an answer. And so I was up scrolling one night on my phone, which I never recommend, right? But I was up scrolling one night on my phone being what is so fundamental about health that I'm missing? And the word circadian rhythm popped up. And I started to go into, okay, well, explain this more to me. What is this concept? Because in all of my teaching from grad school, all of it, I never had heard that word. And that's when I just was oh my gosh, my light environment sucks, right? It's horrible. And I never once thought about how that would play a fundamental role in my health. I went from owning a gym, basically, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, flipping on the overhead lights, and not giving one care about what my light environment was like. And I realized that's why I was tired all the time, but I couldn't sleep at the same time. My digestion was so off. And once I started to pay attention to my light environment, literally within 3 days, I had made more progress than I had in years of doing it in 3 days. And I'm not alone. I've literally had at least 100 people in my community comment very similar timeline. It's 3 days to 1 week. It's wow, there's a palpable difference when I actually make some fundamental changes.
Incredible. Wow. That's helpful to hear, especially for other moms. And just to give context, I think it's okay if I say this.
Yeah,
you're a mom
sure.
of three.
Three, yep.
Yeah.
Three.
So if there's any moms out there, like my wife, who are dealing with some of the things that moms typically think that are normal to deal with, maybe they're common rather than normal, this might be a good episode to listen to then with what we're about to get into. And also, please go back and listen to the episode with Sarah. I feel like that could be a part 1 and part 2. For the episode with Sarah, we focused in a major way on light.
Perfect.
So for this, I want to get into all things easy water,
Yeah.
all things like new approach to cell biology as it relates to easy water, the human biofield, and fascia. So that's what I
Totally.
wanna
Have you
get
talked
into.
to Jerry on Jerry
Yeah,
Pollack? You
yeah.
did?
So I talked to him over 100 episodes ago
Oh,
now,
okay,
and
okay.
it was an incredible conversation. And then I'm really good friends with Dr. Tom Cowan, who his New Biology Clinic sponsors this show,
Cool.
which
Yeah,
I'm
I took
super
that
grateful
program
for.
too.
Yeah, so you're definitely on the same like very fringe tip, hopefully that is going to
Totally
be
fine
growing
with
here
that, yeah.
soon. So on that note, so you majored in biology in your undergrad.
Mhm.
What if anything, let me think how I
I
want
know
to.
where you're going
Yeah,
with
like
this.
do you still consider any of that foundationally at the cellular level to be legitimate? I know you were you in cell biology specifically, or was it just biology?
I was in microbiology.
Oh, you were in
specifically.
microbiology, so you did
Mhm.
focus a lot on cells.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was in micro and molecular biology were my two main focuses there.
Wow.
And yeah, no. I mean, I loved it. Don't get me wrong,
Right.
because my nerd brain likes to dive into like what I thought were legitimate mechanisms that I was learning and stuff. But no, when it comes to truly understanding health, it's so much
Like
simpler
the
than that.
sodium potassium pump.
Yeah, we can break that down.
Yeah.
I bet you've done that with Tom before, but we could break that down.
No,
pretty
actually,
quick.
I haven't done that with
Really?
Tom, so
Okay.
I'm gonna throw that on here for us to talk about. I have a full list of notes of things that I want to go over with you, so this will be really fun because I've said this so many times on this podcast that I'm like fascinated with the intersection between the human biofield and exclusion zone water and how that relates to our biology and ether and plasma and all that.
all
Like
of it.
obsessed. I actually had a hat made recently that said swimming in ether. So like
I wanted a t-shirt, bring back the ether.
that's
right?
dope. That's awesome. That's great. Yeah. So this will be super fun. Okay. So I want to start with this though. What is quantum biology and how did you come to discover it? Because I've said this before on this episode or on this podcast as well. I take issue with the word quantum, but I want to hear like your definition of quantum because maybe it's different than what I'm taking it to mean.
Yeah. So number one, I take big issue with the word quantum when you refer to it as quantum physics or quantum mechanics research that's been done over the past 100 years, right? Because I really think that research set us way back because, end of the 1800s, briefly, right? Michelson-Morley experiment basically came and Michelson-Morley were trying to prove or disprove the existence of a field, right? A field through which light can travel, AKA the ether.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, their experiment, which was poorly done and then subsequently disproven multiple times, but it stuck, right? In the late 1800s, it stuck. So all of a sudden now the ether has been missing from quantum mechanics and it's suddenly returning as the 0 point field or 0 point energy, right? But
dark matter,
dark energy, right? All these different names for it. But literally, it's I don't know these physicists, right? But I have a feeling at the time it was very hard to model the mathematical equations for it, and they love to model all of their stuff in math. And
they do love to model.
What I find, I never took a math course in college. I never took a physics course in college. And I love that because I didn't have to unlearn anything there, right? And so the fact that I'm kind of in biophysics now led me to like go into this with an open mind. But when I talk about quantum, I'm talking about scale, not research.
That's kind of what Sarah said. It's like talking about fractals, essentially.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like you have to give someone a word where they realize you're going below the chemistry model that we've been so ingrained. Like you're talking about this replacement model, right?
Yeah.
That chemicals are going wrong in your body. We somehow have to manipulate them. And then when you use the word quantum, you can say we're going below the level of the chemicals. We're talking about potentially the energies that themselves that make up the chemistry and that actually influence how the chemicals are interacting in the body.
That makes a lot of sense. I can buy that, and that's kind of what Sarah alluded to. And I said, okay, I can get with that definition of quantum because for literally the exact same reasons, I'm so happy that you brought up Michelson-Morley because I've talked about that on this podcast a number of times, both with Brendan Murphy and then also with Dave Weiss and a few other people. And bringing back in the context of the ether makes so much sense of all of these psychic phenomena that people experience, all of these things like menstrual cycle syncing, and especially when you bring in the context of the human biofield as it relates to ether, it makes all these things that seem a little bit woo-woo and out there very real when you know that we're literally walking through this field that we're swimming in. That's why I had that shirt or that hat made swimming in ether. So
and I love that, but it's beyond that, right? It's like literally the ether is organizing itself to make up everything that we see. So we're not just swimming in it, right?
We are it.
We are it, right? You know, we're all manifestations of this one unifying substance.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. That's good. Okay. That was a good starting point. So I've heard you say that we are a battery made out of water, charged by sunlight. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. This right here was, in all of my teaching, this right here was the big aha moment when I realized that health can be so much simpler than we've ever been led to believe. And so in order to break this down, I think we have to talk deeply about that water that lives inside of us. So, in every course I ever taught, when we looked at a cell or when we looked at the human body, and we saw that the vast majority of the body was made out of water, I assumed, and no one ever led me to believe otherwise, that it wasn't water like liquid water in a glass, right? It wasn't just this freely swirling water that was kind of there, but it didn't participate in anything. It was just this substance that was there. And when I began to look more deeply into my health journey, I was led to the work of Jerry Pollack, who also, Gilbert Ling, Maywan Ho, Preparata, Del Gudici. I mean, there's so many amazing researchers when it comes to water.
Maybe throw Victor Schauberger in there
Sure,
too.
Victor Schauberger, great as well. Absolutely, yeah, for sure. And so I would say, when I finally started to understand that the water inside of our body was not in that liquid phase, the vast majority of it was actually in a structured phase, which sounds woo as heck, right, to people. But what I mean by that is when water in our bodies contacts a biological surface, fancy term hydrophilic surface, it reorganizes its structure. And that's another way of saying how the H2O molecules are interacting with each other. Liquid water in a glass, and I always do this when I talk about water, because water molecule is H2O. So there's an oxygen and two hydrogens, but it never forms a straight line. Water always bends at a slight angle. And so when water bends like this, it allows it to then form other bond angles and interact with water. And in a glass, it's kind of willy-nilly. It has the potential, this water molecule can interact over here, and then it can switch over here. Now there's this concept of water having structure in its liquid state, which we could always go into. But in the body, this water organizes.
Can I pause you on that real quick?
Yeah.
Because from my understanding, and maybe it's just specific to Analemma, they are calling it coherent water, and that's different than exclusion zone water.
Very much so.
Okay.
Yes. And so that's the other part. We need like a common language.
Yeah.
I would say exclusion zone water would be the way to describe, or easy water would be the way to describe the water that's inside of our bodies that takes on a more gelled state.
Yeah.
Whereas the coherent water is how the water then can organize itself into coherent geometries in its liquid state, just like I bet you. Yeah.
That's so helpful to hear though, too, because people just throw around terms structured water, coherent water. They don't really know what they mean. And people have sometimes said, I've heard people say that like water in a spring is easy water. I'm like, I used to say that, or at least think that. And I'm like, no, it's not the same thing. Easy water is only when water is in this gel-like state, creating this exclusion zone, which I'd love you to expand on.
Yeah. And so yeah, perfect. So now we're talking about this water, right? Water inside of our bodies when it comes into contact with the biological surface, which is everywhere. We're basically just biological surfaces, and surrounding those biological surfaces or next to them is where this easy water forms. And as this easy water forms, it organizes itself. Now there's some controversy as to what the exact chemical formula looks like, but what you need to know is that basically water organizes itself in a way that all of a sudden now it takes on the viscosity of a gel. And as it does so, as it creates this gel, it literally pushes things away from being able to contact the biological surface.
Pushing away impurities, right?
Yeah, impurities or
anything, right?
Anything
that's not water.
Anything that's bigger than a proton, basically, right? And so it's pushing things away. And as it does so, water then changes in terms of its ability. So it takes on a charge. And I like to use the word charge. We can talk about particles and waves and things at some point if you want to.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that because I have issues with particles too. But
yeah,
it's tough with any of this stuff because just like you said, you need like a common starting point language to be able to describe things to people.
I totally get it. So,
even like electrons, protons, like part of me cringes, but I'm like, what other word do we use? Do we have to say every single time a collapsed wave and a high, like concentrated point of energy? Like, I don't want to. I don't want to have to do that. So let's just say electrons, protons. I assumed you're on the same page on that, but
yeah, I'm totally on that page. And that's exactly it, right? Like you need a common, if you start to say standing waves or something like that, people are just like, whoa.
Dude, exactly.
Like, no, thank you. So now all of a sudden, if I were to measure what would be like the charge of water in a liquid glass, typically it's neutral, right? The electrons and protons, electrons being negatively charged, protons being positively charged, they balance each other out. So there's a neutral. What Jerry found, which is the coolest thing ever, was that when this water creates this exclusion zone structure and you stick a little micro electrode into it to measure the charge, it's negatively charged, which is fascinating. That in and of itself can really throw everything I learned in all of my schooling on its head, because we were taught that in order for the cell, and all cells are designed, healthy cells are designed to have a negative charge inside of them, right?
Which means there's a high potential energy, correct?
Yeah, lots of, so again, this is where we got, if you want to talk about it in a kind of a more basic way, you say the fundamental currency of the body, it's not you have to eat this many carbs. It's not you have to eat this much fat. It's, let's say electrons, right? Let's say charge, voltage, if you will. Because if we're looking below the level of chemistry, we even look at basically energy flows, and there's electricity all throughout the body. And so now all of a sudden we have this negatively charged environment that forever, because they ignored the water, they were trying to decide how did that negative charge come about? And that's where you had the advent of things like the sodium potassium pump. I mean, there's pumps now for, antibiotics, everything. And so when now we realize that the water structure alone gives the cell this negative charge. And a cell that has this negative charge is a healthy cell up to a certain point. And as the cell gets drained of this negative charge, it starts to become diseased to the extent that if it reaches a certain threshold, it starts to divide uncontrollably.
And that's when the cytopathic effect essentially occurs, where the cell breaks down into a bunch of fragments, essentially.
Totally.
It's denaturing the water. There's some variables in there, because part of it is also the fact that you can get a cell that just divides uncontrollably. And so that's cancer, right? Yeah. That's a cell that doesn't get the off switch. So you can get cells that start to fragment, or you can get cells that then become just proliferative, if you will, with no off switch. And so that's like, okay, so if literally the health of my cells is determined by this negative charge, and that determines the health of my organs and the health of my body, then why the heck aren't we focusing on what maintains this negative charge, and also what might be depleting this charge? And so that's where I came across light, right? Because that's one of the things, that's where I came across so many things that can support it, and the things that now basically how our modern lifestyle really is depleting that charge. And so as I started to work on my own body with, okay, how can I replete this charge and then maintain it? And then I worked with clients as well. I mean, I've worked with thousands of people at this point. That is so fundamental to health, as opposed to, take this supplement. It's like, no, build the charge. The charge dictates the energy status of the cell. When a cell has adequate energy, it can do all of its functions and all of its tasks, and it's going to communicate with the DNA appropriately. It's going to communicate with the immune system appropriately. All is copacetic. We're in coherence, right? We come back into alignment. And so it seemed to me like such an easy and simplistic way, and it made so much sense. And I typically trust the ways that are very simple and make absolute sense to as an Occam's razor, right? Like, okay, there we go. That was my Occam's razor with that. And I've run with it ever since, now about 10 years, and it's worked for me. I love that so much, especially because like with me, my own direct experience has shown me how, yes, I'm sure nutrition still plays a factor in some way, but like even the word nutrition, I look at completely differently. I look at sunlight as a form of nutrition, but I'm meaning the way that I look at food equals energy for the body. Food equals potential fuel for the body. That's how I used to think. I don't think that anymore, especially after I did my 15-day water fast, where I was spending tons of time in Crested Butte, Colorado, not a lot of non-native EMFs there, with my feet on the earth, outside, in sunlight, breathing deeply, feeling my emotions that inevitably came up as I'm just drinking water for 15 days. But by the end of my experience, I was like, oh my God, I can do this forever. And when I'm standing in the sun, breathing, I literally feel satiated. I feel nourished. And I didn't have food for 15 days. And I could have kept going, except that, and this is a perfect example of the difference between coherent water versus incoherent water. the whole time I was doing this fast, I was either drinking spring water from springs in Crested Butte or drinking reverse osmosis water that I would use an analemma wand and bring back into coherence and bless. And then also sometimes using the Quinton marine plasma, a little bit of supplements, and then Celtic sea salt. But when I was driving home, I planned to continue my fast, and I had to drive 14 hours in one day. So I was drinking, quote, spring water that I bought from a store in plastic jugs. And I could feel, like I experienced myself drinking in the exact same way without the analemma wand though. My body starting to get very, very dehydrated despite drinking water in the same way, where I was having to pee a lot more. So that shows me that my body was not actually taking on the hydration from the water. And I was sitting in my then 2021 F-150 with all this like computer, like EMS, like bombarding me for 14 hours. And then I get home and I'm like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to continue this fast. Like I'm done now. I just ruined it with that. But it was a perfect example of how being in nature, sunlight, breath, grounding, and then drinking coherent water, that I won't say how long you can last just doing that and not eating food, but I do, know people who claim to be breatharians who have done it for a long time. But it just completely shifted the way that I view nutrition. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on food as it relates to energy, fuel for the body, and overall health.
Yeah, I talk about food the least, right?
I'm sure you used to talk about it the most too. Like all of us did
master's degree in nutrition. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. It was the end all be all. And I don't talk about it a ton anymore because it is so polarizing. And I also realize that there's not one food diet that works for everyone. Like people want to evangelize about their specific way of eating. And I try to avoid that at all costs, because I honestly think that if you nourish your body with all those other things that you're talking about, and I also call it soul nourishment, SOUL, solar nourishment, and then the solar, obviously the sun. If we nourish ourselves that way, food, I think food can be a chance to get together with people. Food can be nutrients. We may need some nutrients, amino acids, building blocks. But in the grand scheme of things, it matters so little in my experience when those other things are really on point.
Right. And maybe the way to look at food is now what foods are denaturing the waters of your body versus what foods are helping to maintain the exclusion zone water in your bodies.
Yeah. I mean, I also think a big topic with this when you look at the water is the deuterium content in the food that we're eating. This is another one about, so my quote unquote ideal diet for anyone is seasonal, local, no glyphosate, right? If you can get those sustainably raised foods, get into a relationship with the local farmers. They love to talk about their foods. They love to talk about their, regenerative practices. And so that, in my opinion, makes the most sense to me, because that ties my light environment to the food that's available to me in that season, to the deuterium content of that food. And if I'm eating that food and we can talk about deuterium, I'm certain you have on this podcast before.
No, I actually haven't.
Really?
I talked about it a little bit with Sarah, but not a ton.
So this is not going to make sense to people unless they know what deuterium is, right? And so deuterium is a version of hydrogen. And we know that water, it has two hydrogens attached to that oxygen. And those hydrogens can either be what are called protium, which would be a hydrogen that has just one proton, okay? And or like it could be a heavier version of hydrogen. It's called a hydrogen that doesn't just have a proton, it has a proton and a neutron. And so hydrogen is the most basic element on the periodic table. It has one proton, one electron, and it has a version of it that also has one proton, one electron, and one neutron. That's the deuterium version. They can both be attached to water. Now, that deuterium version right there that has the proton and the neutron together, that basically doubles the size of hydrogen. It's because the proton and the neutron are the same size. So all of a sudden, if you need the water to take a certain shape and have a certain size to it, or if you need protons in the body or positive charge in the body that has a certain shape and size to it, specifically, typically the body likes the protium version, just the proton. And when you have the neutron with it, it doubles the mass. And so I kind of liken it, and again, this is more particle model, but I think people need to see this. I liken it to trying to take a basketball, which would be a proton, and shoot that basketball into a hoop, right? Swish, swish, swish. All of a sudden now, you're trying to take two basketballs that are connected to each other and shoot it into that same hoop. It's gonna be awkward, right? It's gonna make things different. It's not gonna be as smooth. And so that's how I want people to view this idea of, okay, so when deuterium is potentially in the wrong place, it can wreak a little havoc in the body. And it absolutely can. But deuterium in food is not the same all over on the planet. We have higher deuterium foods in the tropics at the equator. Higher deuterium water at the tropics and the equator. It gets lower and lower as we get to the poles. And so that's where you have to say, like, okay, so my deuterium in the water that I'm drinking and the food that I'm eating, meaning the plants, right? The plants who soak up the rain and pull that hydrogen into, let's say, make carbohydrates. Those plants all of a sudden will have the deuterium of the local environment. That's great because I can then eat that deuterium and I can use that deuterium in my body. There's going to be lower deuterium in animal fats, say. So if I'm living in Canada in the winter and I'm eating more locally and seasonally, I'm going to have more animal fats, which are low in deuterium. Perfect, because I deplete deuterium by things like sunlight exposure and sweating, right? My microbiome.
So that's why people in the tropics are much better, because they're naturally exposed to more sunlight. They're sweating more, thus detoxifying more.
Exactly. And their microbiome is such that it basically hoards that deuterium for them too in their gut, right? And so it's all just thinking about, like, my body is designed to live with the signals of my environment. And so if I give my body the correct signals and the nourishment from my environment, I can handle it perfectly. But what goes awry for some people, and this by far is not the most important thing to stress about. But let's say all of a sudden I'm in Nova Scotia and I decide to go on a tropical fruit smoothie diet January 1st for New Year's, and I start to consume a ton of deuterium-rich fruits. It's not ideal. Now, is it going to be the biggest issue in the world? No. But this is why I want people to realize local seasonal really can be important, right? But
this
again,
makes sense too, because your body is adapted to that terrain, right? So it makes sense to eat other things that are from that terrain.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
really simple.
It's simple. It's good for the farmer. There's so much about it that is important. But it's hard, right? It's easy to, especially like with a family, right? Do I do it perfectly? No way. 3 kids, sports practices, you name it, right? It's like, I don't do it perfectly, but just the awareness that I try to hold for myself and my family when it comes to this is, I think it's important for people to be aware that this is the thing.
Totally. Yeah, totally. Okay. I want to talk now about the effects of infrared light on easy water. Do you think you're good enough at explaining some of the experiments that Jerry did with IR? Okay, yeah, let's go there.
Sure. Yeah. So this goes back to, okay, so health can be simple, right? Maintaining that exclusion zone water inside of the cell. So then the first question was, well, what maintains that exclusion zone water the best? And this is where Jerry and his research team went into the lab. And actually what's fascinating, I love the story and how he tells it, is he had a research student who was just kind of playing around. They realized, okay, these exclusion zones are forming. And the way that you study it in a lab, you put in a piece of what's called Nafion, which is like a membrane that mimics biological surfaces. And you put it into a Petri dish, and then you put in water, but it's not just plain water. You take a glass of water basically and put tiny little black microbeads in it, so that you can see if the water is partitioning itself in different ways. And so he dumped that, that glass with the microbeads into the Petri dish with this biological membrane. And typically an exclusion zone is always going to form, right? So you're going to see all of a sudden you have the membrane, and then all of a sudden there's a clear zone. And this clear zone is representative of the exclusion zone, this EZ zone that Dr. Pollack has labeled it. So you have this EZ water here, and all the water with the microbeads is here. Well, this research student apparently took a light and was just kind of playing around and was like, oh, I'm just going to shine this light at the Petri dish. And all of a sudden he came back a little while later, and all of a sudden where the light was shining, the exclusion zone had expanded. And it was like, wait a second, how'd that happen? Right. And so it turns out that the exclusion zone preferentially absorbs infrared light at about 3,000 nanometers. It actually causes the how these H's and O's are bonding next to each other. It causes that OH to stretch. So it's the OH bond stretch. And so these bonds stretch and you increase the exclusion zone. And when you increase the exclusion zone, that's synonymous with greater charge, right? More negative charge. And so that's, again, okay, so here I am, mom. Now, at this point, I'm a mom of a 1-year-old or so, right? Here I am, mom of a 1-year-old. And it's like, okay, what infrared exposure have I had in the past year, let alone 10 years, maybe, And so I go back to, okay, well, let's see. Indoor lighting, not really anymore, right? Incandescents are gone. What about campfire, candlelight? Don't use that a ton. Well, what about through window glasses? Surely I should be getting plenty of infrared through window glass. Modern energy efficient window glass blocks the infrared wavelength.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
Right? And so now—
In most windows?
In most windows.
Oh my God.
I know, right? The most fascinating thing for people to do, you might not get this here, but in Michigan, in the middle of winter, I tell people, if the sun is shining through a window and you start to feel its warmth, open the window and you think, oh, that's going to let all the cold air in. You feel the warmth come through. Way better, right? You're like, oh my gosh, okay, so I could be warmer when the sun is shining directly on me, even if it's 20 degrees outside.
Wow.
And so, it's like, that's us, that's all of us, right? We're in these infrared deficient interior environments. And of course, we're charge depleted.
Have you seen the videos of cats inside a house, like following the sunlight? It'd be interesting to do a study where you take traditional windows that don't have this IR blocking technology built into it, which I did not know about till right now, which is insane. And have the cats lay in a house with those traditional windows versus IR windows and see the differences in behavior in the cats. That'd be really interesting.
I would love to see that. We have 3 cats, but I would just what I know. And I think part of it has to do with the sounds changing. But anytime we have this, because it'll filter through screens. So anytime we've got the sliding glass door open, but the screen door closed and it's all the sun shining through, they prefer for sure to be in front of the screen door by far. But yeah, what's interesting too? And if anyone wants to do this experiment, quartz crystal is the only glass, right? I'm sure you talk about that. Did you talk to Dolphin? Who did you?
So I've spoken with 2 different people at Analima. So yeah.
Yeah. So that's it, right? I'd love to see if you had a house with a quartz crystal window next to one that was just regular glass to see which would be preferred.
Have you seen the experiments in Russia in the 1980s with quartz crystal as it relates to cell cultures?
I don't think so.
So I forget the name of the guy, but this guy did an experiment where he inoculated a cell culture with a toxic substance, right? And then there was another cell culture on the other side of this wall with a window in between it, right? And so there was no physical contact possible between the 2 cultures. When he put normal glass in between the cultures and inoculated one of them, nothing would happen in the culture across.
Sure.
When he put quartz crystal in between the 2, right? And again, these cultures are not physically touching in any way. There's just a quartz crystal pane in between them. When he inoculated the toxic substances on one, the cytopathic changes in the cells were virtually identical to those on the in the cell culture on the other side, just because of the quartz crystal in between. And I always relate that back to the human body as well. Not that we're quartz crystals, but we do have a crystalline structure in our body, the fascial system, but then also this easy water could be a form of crystalline water, essentially.
Yeah. No, that's a fascinating experiment. That's building on, that was Gurwich's experiments.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't his. No, but I'm saying they're building on Gurwich back in the 1920s. Did you remember the onion tip experiment?
No.
Oh, it's very similar. They were wondering, he called it mitogenic radiation going through, and they were wondering what was being passed, and so they were realizing it was potentially biophotonic energy signaling that was being passed through. So it's really cool. I haven't read those. So and that all relates to the biofield and stuff like that. We're going to set that aside. We're going to eventually end up there. But okay, so we talked about IR as it relates to exclusion zone water, and it basically expands the exclusion zone. It creates more negative charge in the cell, which again
Correct me if I'm wrong. That means more potential energy in the cell, basically more optimal health, let's say, more optimal health expression in your body and accumulation. So what about the effects of UV on exclusion zone water?
Yeah, so UV on exclusion zone water does have quite it likes to absorb all light, right? You'll see some expansion with the visible light spectrum. You'll get a big expansion with that infrared that we're talking about. UV, interestingly, this actually gets absorbed and creates what's called a plasma of free electrons in it. So essentially it energizes the exclusion zone water. And so this is where I want people to kind of picture this, because I think this is going to be important when we talk about fascia. So if this exclusion zone water is everywhere, right, around all the molecules and membranes and stuff in our bodies.
I love that you're on the same page.
We have to talk like this, right?
That makes me so happy, though. That makes me so happy because there is sometimes when I'm like interviewing people and they say something and it's clear that they like really they're making an assertion that is a like well-established thing. And I like have to just kind of bite my tongue and just like, okay, it's all good.
I know.
But I love that you're doing air quotes on like half of these things. That's good. That's a good sign.
I mean, so
for lack of a better term, membrane, okay.
Right? Boundary, yeah. So anyways, we've got this exclusion zone water everywhere. Basically, it creates this interconnected system. And so what people have to realize is why it matters if it gets energized when exclusion zone water strikes it is because it is an interconnected system. It's a lattice. So one of the best ways that it's been described is like a honeycomb-shaped lattice, where picture a bunch of hexagons interlinking, and forming basically these exclusion zone water layers. Anytime you have molecules linked like that in an array, the charge doesn't stay around one of the molecules, right? It's not just hoarded around this particular water molecule. It becomes part of the collective, which is why if we start to energize the exclusion zone water on the surface of our body, because ultraviolet light doesn't penetrate deeply, it just touches the surface. But all the molecules on the surface of my skin that are surrounded by exclusion zone water then can receive this plasma of electrons, this charge. They can become energized, and then we can funnel that charge wherever it's needed. That
makes so much sense because if you think of our biofield, right, is basically an amalgamation or the largest concentric circle, if you will, of the individual biofields that I'd imagine we have of our organ systems, but then also like of our cells themselves, right? And so Eileen will always say this: a strong coherent field will overtake and entrain a weak and coherent field. So if the UV light, by touching the cells on our skin, and then also our skin itself being the largest organ, well, fascia would be the largest organ aside from the skin, right? Okay. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. It's essentially that those cells are then bringing into coherence the other cells of our body, moving inward as the UV light is hitting our body.
Absolutely. Exactly. Right. It's we feel like we're these separated, and there's no separation. It's all connected. But that's the thing too with this. We assume, like my assumption for a long time was like, okay, the liver is the liver and the heart is the heart, and this concept of the exclusion zone water essentially connecting everything. I mean, of course, there's a means to pass energy and information all throughout the body that's faster than the nervous system and things like that. So yeah, the light really plays a big role in maintaining exclusion zone water and the charge and the energetic status of it, meaning then the energetic status of our bodies and our cells. And then, beyond the lack of infrared in our interior environments, of course, what are the things that have been shown to deplete it? Well, glyphosate, right? Non-native EMFs. And so...
Sorry. So the reason I'm saying sorry is for those that are listening on audio is because we're literally sitting in a studio with like concentric rings of non-native EMFs, but it's okay temporarily, and you do a lot of work on the side, so It's all good.
Well, that's here. We were kind of briefly chatting about this, but I think fear is worse than any of this stuff, right? Yeah. And so I choose to be aware, but not live in fear.
Love that. Good balance. Yeah, know what's going on, but don't be like so afraid that you're scared to go anywhere, do anything.
Exactly.
We were joking, like if I interviewed you for this podcast and because of all the non-native EMFs, you just like breathe the entire episode and don't say anything to me. Like, okay, Carrie, thank you. That was great. Okay, so basically the IR, it expands the exclusion zone,
Mhm.
and then the UV excites the exclusion zone.
Yes.
Okay, or energizes the
Yeah,
exclusion zone,
sure.
let's say. Okay, so I guess this will encompass this, I'd imagine, what we're just talking about. But what are some ways that we can maintain the coherence or expand the coherence of the exclusion zone water in our bodies other than IR or UV?
So I think a couple of movement, I think, is one, right? Movement is this idea. I have having been a personal trainer and athlete pretty much my whole life, I've got a different take on exercise. I think exercise generates electrons, right? We are what are called piezoelectric. So through movement, our connective tissue can create charge for us. And so, I think movement is one of the best ways that we can do that as well. Earthing and grounding is another way, right? The surface of the earth is like this infinite source of charge that we can pull in. And the beautiful way to see that really is to see red blood cells before and after earthing. That's a great way to visualize the exclusion zone too. So these red blood cells are designed to have a halo of negative charge around them called their zeta potential. And when they've lost this negative charge, they start to stack on top of each other like pancakes, right? This like rouleau effect, it's called. And so you could look at live blood analysis and see the red blood cells literally clumping next to each other. And then when the red blood cells clump like this, they can't vortex nicely and deliver energy, and they're not delivering oxygen. And so you can look at the live blood analysis then, and then you could take someone and you can have them earth, and you can all of a sudden see that these red blood cells now are puffed away from each other because they've reestablished this negative charge. And just like two magnets with the same, pole essentially can't ever touch together, you're creating this beautiful repulsion, which helps to maintain the vortex flow of the blood. And so,
wow.
Beautiful blood flow.
And for you, what are some ways that you're ensuring you're getting enough IR and UV, especially because you live in a more northern climate too?
Yeah, in the summer it's free, right?
Yeah.
I typically go outside. I love to exercise outside too, so you can generate your own IR via exercise as well. So I think that's another way to establish that. In the winter, infrared, another way to say infrared is heat. Mm-hmm. So anything that's heat based. So I do have a sauna. I love my sauna. In the winter, I use red light therapy as well. It doesn't have the same impact, I would say, on the exclusion zone, but there's a lot of benefits to that as well. I'm a hot bath queen, right? I love therapeutic bathing. And so that's another way that I'll do that as well. And so hot showers, right? Movement, cuddling, have your dog on your lap, right? That's IR, right? We're maintaining each other's IR, infrared sources. And so that is just, I honestly think that some of the reasons why all of those things are beneficial, like cuddling with a loved one or a pet and exercise and a sauna, I think a lot of the reason is it just goes down to we're maintaining exclusion zone water levels in the body.
I'm so glad you said that too, because that's kind of how I've come to look at health, especially because of Jerry Pollack. I would say I got to give a shout out to Dr. Tom Cowan. Mm-hmm. It's all based in what is denaturing the water in your body versus what is maintaining the coherence, if not expanding upon the coherence of the water in your body. Like that's what health all boils down to. Okay. I've put it into 4 categories, so I'd love to hear what you think of these 4 categories. So physical malnutrition, which of course relates to like lack of real food, lack of coherent water that you're consuming, lack of movement, lack of natural light, and lack of time in nature. Those would be examples. I'm sure there's several others. Metaphysical malnutrition, which would be examples: lack of community, lack of stillness, lack of prayer, lack of laughter, lack of purpose. Those would be some examples of that. Physical toxins, which examples would be glyphosate, fluoride, folic acid, pharmaceutical products, overconsumption of ultra-processed foods.
Yep.
And then metaphysical toxins. Examples would be toxic relationships, limiting beliefs, perpetual fight or flight, non-native EMFs, and then dishonesty. Those would be examples of metaphysical toxins. So basically, everything is metaphysical or physical malnutrition, metaphysical and physical toxins. Those are what lead to the denaturing of the water in your body.
Totally. Yeah, I love it. That's a beautiful way to organize that. I can't really add anything or subtract anything from that.
Came up with it last night.
Did you really?
Literally last night, because I was making my presentation for I'm about to travel and give a bunch of presentations. Yeah. So it just clicked in my brain. I'm like, really because I was thinking about water too, because that's a part of my presentation. I talk about it quite a bit. And I was like, it all boils down to what denatures the water in our bodies. That's it. And what are the things that do?
You can't say denatures, though.
Okay, why can't you say denature?
Because denature means proteins,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Proteins become denatured. Water becomes destructured or
Destructured,
organized.
okay.
Right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
destructured.
I'm just saying, right? You
Yeah,
know,
that's helpful. That's helpful. Destruct, because I need to stop using that then. Okay, destructured. So aside from those things that I just mentioned, do you think there's anything else that destructures the waters in our body, which leads to ill health?
No, I mean, honestly, those categories are great. And I think it's simple enough for people to get it. And if you throw too much, you know, it becomes too overwhelming.
Yeah, and then you're fucking trying to avoid everything. And I think that's where it's like the categories bringing in the metaphysical components the most, like the perpetual fear and anxiety, the lying to yourself or others, like that will lead to your biology expressing in such a way that the water is not denatured, destructured, essentially. And that's going to present literal physical symptoms of illness.
Yep, totally.
Yeah.
Those all have an effect on the biofield as well, right? The ether, a lot of those too, right?
Yeah.
Field informs the physical through the water, right?
Okay, so now that we're on that point, well, there's still a few more things I want to talk about related to water itself. But I also thought about this last night. And I was listening to some of your stuff and it made me think about this. It just clicked. And I texted Eileen and I said, hey, I got to tell you this. So I haven't talked with her yet about this, but okay. So when we are properly hydrated, when we're doing all these things that expand the exclusion zone of the waters in our cells, right? So that exclusion zone pushes out impurities, right?
Correct.
Right. And it's becoming very, it has a lot of potential energy and we express optimal health. Okay. So Eileen has shown that the biofield retains our unprocessed stuff, essentially. And those show up as distortions in the biofield. And that can present as physical symptoms as well, right? So if you're doing the work to clear your biofield and process those emotions effectively, and they're no longer showing up as distortions, over time, things that are further away from your body in your biofield are further in the past, right? So the more that you're doing the work on a daily basis, it has a cumulative effect of these, quote, impurities, if you want to call them that. These emotions are no longer impacting you and they're getting further out in your field. So it's like the biofield as this plasma field itself represents just a larger fractal version of what's happening with exclusion zone water, in that the impurities are being pushed out if you're doing the work on a daily basis to just feel your feelings and maintain the coherence of your field.
Yeah, I love it. There's an exclusion zone in the field as well. And what's fascinating is that biofield zone is not stagnant, right? You know, it's vortexing, right? It's at the torus, right? And what I've learned, or just, you know, I'm going to give Dan Winter tons of credit here for this. He's really done a lot of service to humanity with what he's figured out. But what I kind of visualize in my brain when I explain this to my clients and community is that as this field implodes into us, we're imploding that energy and the information. We have a chance to sort out the waves that don't fit, because the only waves that can implode constructively, right? We're talking about imploding energy, like energy that's coming to this point. The only waves that can implode constructively are the ones that are in the phi ratio. And so if we live in compassion and love, we then can start to sort out the destructive interference, right? We can do a self-sorting.
Whoa.
Right?
That's mind-blowing.
Right? And so then it's like we're cleaning it, right? As we're pushing it out, like we're getting rid of this stuff, these layers and layers and layers of what might be kind of creating dissonance in our field. Mm-hmm. If we can start to come to a point of compassion, that literally allows the waves the only way that the waves can implode constructively, it's called adding and multiplying recursively. Basically, they accelerate themselves. They create greater acceleration. Right. Whoa. And so that's also I think you'd appreciate that. That's also how we can have a healthy immune system, because we then can purge our physical bodies of the waves that are creating maybe dissonance in the cells as well, that can present themselves then as cells that want to lyse or whatever and create this debris, right? And so literally this is it's all through the physical to the field, and then the field back to the physical, but it's not static, right? It changes. And the quality of our liquid crystalline bodies, the quality of our liquid crystalline water basically determines the fidelity of the signal we're receiving.
Yeah, makes total sense.
In the same way that, like, you know, these people who manufacture chips to like these silicon chips are there's like, we can't have no impurities, right? Because we need to maintain high quality, high fidelity. We want to do that too. We want to have a stronger signal, right? We want to get rid of the noise. And if one more layer on this would be, this is why grounding is so important. Because our physical bodies are not just gathering energies from the earth when we're grounding. In the same way that electronic equipment, like, you know, the antenna at the radio station needs to be grounded, you increase the signal to noise ratio. You tap into signal. You get rid of the noise, right? And so you're sorting out and you're imploding into your body this information and energy in a way that then can, through the lens of compassion, that then heals you.
You just blew my mind.
I mean,
that was
right,
incredible.
though?
Yeah.
And it's not just implosion, right? With implosion comes distribution, right?
Yeah.
There's this, we get this inhale, exhale,
Yeah.
expansion, contraction. But it's why I think fear is the worst thing.
Yeah.
Because fear creates optimum destructive interference. We're not imploding, right? We're not gathering charge. We'll go back to water in a second here, but while we're on this, the ether really is what's feeding us. Right? Source energy, divine energy, God, Christ consciousness. You can call it so many different things. It has. I've seen 97 different names, right?
Literally 97?
Literally 97 different names for it, yeah.
I like saying God, and I got that from Eileen too, because I was saying source for a while. She's like, that just sounds so wimpy. Like source. And like, I don't have any issues with people using that. But like, after she said that, I was like, that's such a, God sounds very like powerful.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
God is all around us.
Right.
Yeah.
God is
us. And,
and that's why we're also then manifestations of God, right?
Yeah.
All creation is a manifestation of God, right? But what we're doing is, that's life force energy too, right? God is life force energy. And so as we're imploding that, our ability to implode life force energy determines our ability then to distribute it through our tissues. So we're imploding and distributing. And if we can do that in a means of compassion, that's negentropic, right? It means that we're self-sustaining, we're anti-chaos, right? Our body is reorganizing itself all the time. We all know those people who supposedly live the perfect lifestyle when it comes to nutrition and exercise, and yet they're progressing more and more into chaos, right? They're aging too quickly. You're like, what's going on there? And they're lacking this concept of, oh gosh, if I can live in compassion, and if I can implode this life force energy at perfect implosion, perfect distribution, and then that sustains my body in negentropy or lack of chaos. I'm reorganizing my body all the time. I can literally reverse age.
Have you heard the term syntropy, by the way?
Syntropy. Yeah, I've heard the term
syntropy.
Okay,
I use that instead of negentropy.
Yeah, negentropy does.
Syntropy.
It's hard. Yeah. So basically that's exactly what it is, right?
Yeah.
You're halting chaos, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to, this idea, if you really want to get esoteric, have you ever read any of Baird Spalding's stuff? Baird Spalding was an individual who traveled to India, Pakistan, Tibet in 1894 with a group of people. And he met some Far East masters there and just lived with them. And these masters were basically like, you don't need to believe what we teach, just observe, right? And draw your own conclusions. And some of the stuff that they saw was phenomenally, quote unquote, out there. But these individuals were supposedly, and I believe this, hundreds of years old, these masters, because they've learned, right, to sustain themselves, living that life of compassion, right, nourishing themselves through spirit. And so it's something that we just assume. It's like, oh, I'm going to age or I'm getting older. It's like, wait a second. And I'm not about, I'm needing to stay young, but like, we need to be taught these things, and a lot of it has to do with our ability to pull that energy in through the field.
Maintain a strong, coherent field. It's interesting as that relates to like healing by proximity, because a lot of these ancient masters, or if you like stories of people going to sit with a guru in India, and just by being in proximity to them, and I'm sure the placebo effect relates to this somehow, but I would imagine if we had the equipment, and I think we do have some equipment to measure this though, the coherence coming off of those individuals absolutely does help bring into coherence other people who are around it, where they have these miraculous healings occur just by being in proximity to someone with such a strong coherent field.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would imagine gas discharge visualization, Kirlian photography, like we would see these beautiful fields around. What's fascinating too, when you look back at some of these temples that these individuals visited, they're negentropic. They're made out of these beautiful granite structures. They've been around for literally 12,000 years. And as soon as you get a little chip, it restores itself.
Whoa.
Right? Because it has the energy and the information through the field to do that.
Wait, the buildings restore themselves? Whoa.
So I'm just saying, like, you can also condition your field and condition a space. This goes back to the water. This is why oftentimes there's healing waters around the world. It's where there's either energetic anomalies and or people have erected cathedrals or holy temples. Those things, and people coming to pray, making a George. When you pray at this, you're conditioning the space into coherence, right? So why can't we do that? We can. Do you know William Tiller? Bill Tiller. He's since passed on, but he basically showed that electric fields you can compress, you can pull in more etheric energy into a space, more charge, more life force through focused attention and intention, right? Yeah. This is a Stanford physicist, right? Who was, of course, at the time, like, we don't want to hear what you have to say, Bill. But so again, it's like this idea that we are victims of our situation. We're not. We need to be empowered. And the way this intersects with what we're talking about with water is like, water is our antenna for that, right? And so through being able to maintain adequate water, pure water in our bodies, more charged water, we're able to do these sorts of things that we're talking about. Yeah.
Like the examples of, by the way, I love this because just how the ether relates to the biofield relates to water. Like it just makes sense of so many things. As I was about to say, the countless examples of people meditating in mass, focusing on a specific goal, whether it's to lower crime in a specific area or create healing effects of some location. Topher and I just talked about on our episode some of the stuff that Joe Dispenza has uncovered, studies where a set of people was instructed to pray for a certain subset in the hospital, and then another subset didn't have prayer directed towards them. And the people who had prayer directed towards them had better healing outcomes than those who didn't back in the past.
Wow.
Yeah. Like retrocausal healing, essentially.
Not surprised, but
incredible. But the point is, like, our pointed awareness, especially when done collectively, absolutely produces real world effects. And that's why I get so frustrated with the quote truther community, because yes, they're aware of all the negative things that are happening in the world. And I do think it's important at some level to be aware of some of them, right, so you're not spiritually bypassing and just pretending none of it's happening. And at the same time, it's like back in the 1800s, was I aware of every freaking intricate detail of some fire that broke out in Pakistan or something? No, I wasn't. And I don't need to be necessarily. But point being, to some level, we probably need to be aware. But if we're just continually focusing on all of that, especially collectively, we're just helping to perpetuate more of it. It's like we need to, yes, be aware of those things a little bit, but gather together and be like, okay, we know that that's nonsense is going on. What can we do physically to overcome that? But I would say more importantly, what can we do metaphysically, aligning our thoughts and feelings to point our awareness towards something that we want collectively? And I think that is what we as the health truther community need to be focusing on.
Yeah, totally. I've explained it this way to my community. There's a field that all humans can tap into. Right? It's called the morphogenetic field, right?
Yeah.
Rupert Sheldrake, and every species has their own field of information that's specific to them, and we've polluted our field, right? It's why, as a clinician, I don't just see people with one or two things. It's nervous system dysregulation and histamine imbalances and Lyme, and it's like we've so polluted our field that it's hard for us to come to homeostasis because there's this underlying level of, well, why is everyone anxious? Why?
Yeah.
It's like, well, yeah, some of it has to do with, what's going on in the world. Some of it has to do with screen time, of course. But at the same time, we've polluted our morphogenetic field to that extent that unless you're aware of it, that's your default, right?
Yeah.
So those of us who know differently, it's our responsibility to educate others about what we can do to change that. And you change it through, yes, I'm aware of what's going on in the world, but I choose to spend more time listening to media like this.
Yes.
In prayer and meditation, listening to songs that make me happy, things that make me joyful. And again, it's not spiritually bypassing when you realize that this is contributing to the greater spirituality of all of us.
Absolutely.
And so, it's just this awareness that I don't think, again, bring it into our awareness and knowing that we can do something. And it's this idea of, yes, I may be one person, but I can choose my media and what I put out there, my negativity versus positive. I mean, I have no desire to dive as deep as I did 4 years ago. Right? It's like, I'm aware.
We know what's going on there.
I get it, right? I get it. And I stay up to date to the extent that I want to stay up to date. But I've reached this level of detachment where it's like, I'm aware but detached. I know what I need to do, right? And I choose then to do other things like meditation and prayer and laughter and joyfulness. And heck, even playing basketball, right? You and I chatted about this a little bit. Like stuff that just brings you joy and uplifts you that can, uplift those around you.
In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. If you frequently tune into The Way Forward, you know that I strongly believe chronic and recurring stress is one of the leading causes of illness. And unfortunately, stress has become a commonplace experience for many of us in the modern world. Did you know that magnesium plays a crucial role in managing stress? It's essential for ensuring adequate hydration of your body's waters, regulating stress hormones like cortisol, balancing our nervous and hormonal systems, and producing the relaxing neurotransmitter GABA. Unfortunately, most magnesium supplements you'll find in health stores use only the two cheapest synthetic forms of magnesium. And since they're not full spectrum, they won't help with your magnesium deficiency or do much to support your health. There are actually 7 key forms of magnesium, and you must get all of them if you want to experience its calming, stress-balancing effects. That's why I only recommend Magnesium Breakthrough by Biooptimizers. It's the only organic, full-spectrum magnesium supplement that includes 7 unique forms of magnesium for stress resilience, better sleep, and better hydration, all in one bottle. For those interested, you can try Magnesium Breakthrough with an exclusive offer. Just go to buyoptimizers.com/Alec or head to the show notes and use promo code ALEC10 during checkout to save 10% on your order. Okay, so I want to finish up on the water piece, and we're kind of like jumping.
Sorry.
It should no. Every guest comes on and says sorry, and I'm like, dude, that's every episode, so it's got to be me. It's like it's 100% me. It's my mind where like something will come in. I'm like, oh my god, I got to ask about that. Then we go off on a tangent. It's all good. It happens. Just part of the podcast. So yeah, let's talk about like just cell biology a little bit more as it relates to water. And you brought up off camera like mitochondria as it relates to water.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this is a misnomer, I think, right? I think a lot of people assume that the water we drink is what ultimately hydrates our cells. And yes, right, there is the water, but there's a path at the water that we drink, right? The water that we drink it, we'll absorb it into our bloodstream. Our body is always looking to maintain our blood volume, right? That's a very important thing. There's things that happen when our blood volume becomes too dehydrated, right? There's histamine signals that go off. There's a lot of things that can happen there. But there's another way that we can have intracellular hydration, and it's through mitochondrial water production. And again, this is something I had to completely unlearn and relearn, which was the idea that mitochondria are important for us because they make ATP. And so for those people who don't know what mitochondria are, inside of our cells, we've got little functioning organs, if you will, inside of our cells. And mitochondria is this functioning organelle, it's called. And the mainstream thought is that mitochondria are important because they take the electrons from the food we eat and they transform those electrons into ATP. And ATP is the energy currency of the body because it has a high energy phosphate bond, meaning it's got a high bond energy stored in it that it can give to reactions to cause things.
All based in biochemistry, essentially.
All based in biochemistry. Yeah. And what's been ignored, we can break down ATP if you want, but what's been ignored is the idea that, and by the way, in the process of making ATP, mitochondria also produce water and carbon dioxide and infrared. Okay. Right. And that's like just glossed over, right? Oh yeah. Byproducts, water, carbon dioxide. They don't even talk about the infrared.
Hey, ATP right here and all these other things, not really relevant. Let's just focus on ATP.
Right. And so there is an epidemic of mitochondrial dysfunction. Again, our circadian disruptions, the toxin exposure, the non-native EMFs, all of those things are not only potentially disrupting our ability to form exclusion zones in the first place, but they're also damaging the mitochondria's ability to make water, which is a true source of intracellular hydration. And I was hesitant. I was speaking at a conference recently with Jerry Pollack, and I was hesitant to talk about this because water is his baby. It should be, right?
Yeah, you don't want to like I've had the same thing happen. I don't want to go off on a tangent on this, but I know exactly how you feel because one of my first virology presentations I gave, Dr. Andy Kaufman was literally sitting in the audience. And I was like, oh God. And he did it's Andy. He did stand up and raise his hand. Actually, Alec, no, that's incorrect. Like just on two things. So I did feel good that only two things
were corrected, right? So that was the same thing because my general gist of that talk was, but wait, what about the mitochondria, right? And the intersection of light and the mitochondria, not just light and exclusion zone water, because mitochondria need light signaling as well to optimize water production. Mm-hmm. And so let's, I don't want to go through the electron transport chain. I don't want to talk about the ATPase. These are just, potential components of mitochondria that help the mitochondria make water. But what we know is that for mitochondria to be better water producers, they need red and near-infrared light. Again, what is deficient in all of our modern lighting, right? Red and near-infrared light. What is the sunlight? The vast majority of sunlight, I'm sure Sarah probably said this, the vast majority of sunlight contains 40 to 50% infrared at all times. Mm-hmm. And so we're missing the near-infrared as well. So not only are we not being charged with what's called more mid-far infrared that Jerry talks about as expanding the exclusion zone, but we're also deficient in the near infrared, which we maybe need to break up infrared, but near infrared, which is another portion of the infrared spectrum that helps the mitochondria make the water for us in the first place.
Wow. So we're talking about light to expand the exclusion zone, UV light to excite or energize the exclusion zone, and now near infrared to help the mitochondria create more water inside itself. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting you say that. I think I brought this up with Sarah too. I interviewed Brian Sanders, who spent some time with the Hadza people in Africa. And one thing that he said that he kind of glossed over a little bit that really got my attention is that they hardly drink water. They just like pull their hands up in a little bit of like brown muddy water and drink that. Whereas people that go over there and visit them are constantly having to chug water because it's in Africa. But I think it's because their bodies are so accustomed to being out in the sun, to having their bare feet on the earth, to not living in this dysfunctional, dysregulated modern world, so that their bodies, their mitochondria, are producing this internal water, so they don't need these external sources of water and hydration as much as we do.
Totally. I think that's absolutely likely the case. Dr. Boros is very much in alignment with, do you know Dr. Boros? Laszlo Boros.
Damn, this is what I love about you and Sarah too. You give me so many other names that I have no idea. Thank you. Yeah, there's another one I have to interview.
He has he's really done a lot of deuterium research, right? It is a more traditional mindset in terms of the model that deuterium is used by. But that being said, he doesn't think that he thinks people who have highly functioning mitochondria don't need to drink water. He drinks olive oil when he's thirsty.
Wow.
Because those are basically electrons in fat that then can help his mitochondria make more water.
Can I give another example of that real quick? This might be a little bit of an extreme example. A friend of mine, Rodney Lavoie Jr., he's very well known for being the plasma king. And what he means by that is plasma blood ultrafiltrate, which is urine.
Yeah.
So he's like a strong proponent of urine therapy, to the point that I lived with him for 30 days. I did not see him drink one freaking glass of water. He spent basically all day outside. He was only drinking his own pee or eating very water-dense fruits.
Yep.
I didn't see him drink one glass of water the whole time. His skin is crystal clear.
Yep.
He regrew some of his hair. His skin is soft like a baby's skin. He's super ripped and shredded, and that's like all his nutrition is only those things. Doesn't drink any water at all.
Again, I'm not surprised, right?
Yeah.
Because his mitochondria are making it and his body is maintaining the energy. What it comes down to is, it's like, yes, you need a certain amount of, like basically this exclusion zone water, you need a certain amount of it inside of the cells. You need a certain amount around the cells, surrounding the cells, and in the blood volume, right? And if you're maintaining that, you're energetically charged, right? And so if your mitochondria can make water for you, you need to drink less. Mm-hmm. It makes perfect sense. And if you're maintaining the water that you have, this water battery that you have with the sunlight exposure, the earthing, the grounding, the breath, and we haven't talked about it, but melanin also.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. So mitochondrial water production, right? That's very important. Basically, again, get in the red and the near infrared light. Get into full spectrum sunlight. Stop fearing sunlight. And the same toxins that impact the exclusion zone are going to impair the mitochondrial function. One more thing, though, before we go to melanin.
Yeah.
Psychological stress has been shown to downregulate mitochondrial efficiency by 15 to 20%, right? And so again, this is where we're talking about, okay, wait, let's, yes, I need the light exposures. Yes, I want to avoid the toxins, but not to the extent of being obsessed about it, right? Like, if the psychological stress will be worse potentially than you missing your red light therapy session today.
It's a difference of intention. I'm doing this because I want to be more in alignment with God and nature, versus I'm doing this because I'm scared of all the things around me if I don't do this.
Exactly.
It's literally just a difference in intention. And intention is such an important, crucial piece about how our biology expresses, because our foundational beliefs lead to our thoughts and feelings, which absolutely have a measurable and observable impact on our biology. I mean, I think that's well established
100%.
by now.
Yeah, 100%. And so again, so that's another source of hydration, right, in the body, those mitochondria. Melanin actually helps us to maintain water and gives us a source of energy and oxygen potentially. I call it breathing through melanin, potentially hemoglobin. Actually, there's a lot of things that we might be able to break down here. But that being said, is that melanin is a pigment, right? Then most people are familiar with melanin being the pigment that gives our skin a certain tone, or our eyes or our hair. But melanin is inside our bodies, inside every cell. And there are more melanin-rich tissues than others. The researcher here is Arturo Solis Herrera. He basically was trying to study the 3 leading causes of blindness and saw that it was potentially an energy shortage, but realized that those parts of the eyes lacked blood flow, but they were rich in melanin. So if they weren't making their energy traditionally from having the blood deliver oxygen and electrons, essentially nutrients, to the mitochondria, what was maintaining the energy in those really energy dense tissues of the eye? And he realized that there was a lot of melanin deep in those layers of the eye. And what he eventually found out over the course of 30 years of research was melanin, like all other molecules in the body, are surrounded by this exclusion zone water shell. He calls it a hydration shell of water. And melanin, because it's pigmented, it's a darker pigment typically, it's absorbing light energy. And as it absorbs light energy, it takes that energy and splits 2 water molecules that are near it, and it splits those water molecules into molecular hydrogen and molecular oxygen.
Whoa.
It can then donate the molecular hydrogen. That's an electron carrier. So that's oxygen for oxidative phosphorylation, right? That's electrons as well. And then it can donate it so you can reestablish energy in a tissue. And if you don't need to, you can reform the water molecule.
Whoa.
So it's like this self-fulfilling cycle.
So basically pushes out to check essentially if it needs to regenerate any tissue. And if not, then it just comes back to reform
absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Exactly. And it's the only molecule that can split the water to molecular oxygen and molecular hydrogen and then reform water. There's other molecules in the body that can split the water to donate oxygen and electrons where they're needed. But it's the only one that can then reform it. And so and it's ubiquitous throughout all nature. There's so much that can be said about that. But again, it's just like, and we don't just have melanin on our skin. We can the internal melanin. There's certain diseases, Parkinson's, for example. There's certain diseases where you get a loss of neuromelanin, the melanin that's deep in the brain. And so, if we can do things to maintain that internal source of melanin as well, we allow our body an additional energy source. Right?
And what are we doing again? Is it just, again, going back to the basics of grounding, breathing deeply, feeling your feelings, standing out in the sun, those types of things, moving your body?
Sure. And then if you live in a cold climate, it would be cold exposure. Cold exposure creates more ultraviolet light inside of our bodies. So let's go there, right? What causes us to get tan? Ultraviolet light strikes our skin. We start to produce more melanin in our skin, right? More of a tan. That ultraviolet light. Well, we make ultraviolet light inside of our bodies as well. This biophotonic emissions is the light that's produced by our cells. And in response to cold, we make more UV light inside of our bodies that maintains the melanin. So in people who have low light environments at the poles, right? Winter, where I live in the winter, I am designed to get cold, right? Because then I can maintain the melanin not through my skin. I can't form a tan if I wanted to, but I can maintain the melanin where it really truly counts in terms of my organ function, which is deep inside of me.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
I mean, there's even interesting research that talks about how that melanin, it sequesters toxins, right? So melanin can bind to heavy metals, which is why they studied pigeon feathers, the tips of pigeon feathers, and they found that pigeons in these kind of more polluted cities, the dark melanin pigments at the tips of the pigeon feathers were basically a storehouse of heavy metals. So I also teach this. And again, this might be my synthesis. I'm kind of I'm saying 2 + 2 = 4. There's not a massive amount of research, but this makes sense to me. If as I'm layering melanin in my skin and melanin can sequester heavy metals, then as I shed that skin, that layer of tan in the winter months, I'm potentially also allowing my body another means of detoxification.
Whoa.
Stuff that I want to have researched. Like I have a list of 300 things I want to have researched more deeply.
I bet you do. Oh my God. Well, another thing that comes up to me, going back to the Hadza people in Africa, because they're also very dark-skinned Black people too, I would imagine that also just adds to the reasons why they don't have to drink as much water.
Sure. And
because they're more melanated.
and why traditionally they're some of the best endurance athletes on the planet,
Yep.
right? It's like they're fueling themselves not through glucose,
Mhm.
right? There's other fuel sources. So yeah, it's pretty, it's again, things that we need to be aware of because we've been told maybe 5%
Yeah.
of what there is out there.
So because we're kind of on the topic of like light and how that relates to, our health and things like this, and we've already touched on red light, near infrared, UV, all the things. I asked generally the same question with Sarah regarding like biohacking devices and replacement devices for nature. What is your opinion on that? Is there a legitimate replacement for nature?
No, there's not.
You don't seem offended by that question. Like, dude, come on. No.
I mean, like, listen, there are situational needs.
Yeah.
Right. So for someone, for example, who wakes up and has to go to a factory first thing in the morning before sunrise, would I want them to maybe get a bright light stimulus or some red light therapy or some supports for their body in a not ideal human environment? Absolutely. But at the same time, everyone wants a device.
Yeah.
And yes, I think red light therapy can be highly therapeutic. I mean, there's many devices that can be highly therapeutic, but at the same time, I want people to think, oh, it's free. It's the best thing I can get is through nature, the absolute best, right? So yes, do I use an earthing mat, a grounding mat every once in a while? 100% I do. But would I ever say, oh, this is better or equal to me being outdoors? No, of course it's not. Because when I step outside, not only am I getting the Earth's electrons, and grounding this, improving that signal to noise ratio, I'm also getting the light entering my eyes to sync my circadian rhythm. I'm hearing the sounds from nature, which is another interesting thing to get people to shift to. It's like, yes, I live in a city, but I can still hear the birds, right? As opposed to people who hear the traffic, right? That's
100%.
Another shift.
Have you heard any of the videos where people take cicadas and slow them down?
No, but I'd love to.
It sounds like they're like singing together in harmony. It's incredible. It's so cool.
I can't wait to. My kids were obsessed with cicadas, so yeah, I can't wait to find.
So
those
that
videos.
Maybe that's why like that sound. I mean, I know some people say cicadas are annoying, and they can be if they're like right near you, but that sound in the distance, a little bit further away, is very therapeutic, at least for me.
I mean, what's more annoying, that or like a jackhammer of construction, right?
Yeah, yeah. I also heard it was interesting that when Sarah interviewed you a while back, this was like 3 years ago. Sarah mentioned that her daughter talks about liking to be at her grandma's more because when she's in what was their, I think, former house, the walls were too loud.
Yep.
And it's because of the dirty electricity, the non-native EMFs. That's actually a good place to go, especially as we move into the biofield. What is your approach, not fear-based, just your approach to dealing with non-native EMFs?
Hardwire what I can, put my phone on airplane mode whenever possible, right? And run things through that. Only use Wi-Fi when it's necessary. It's not by any means an obsessive strategy. I think people would be pretty surprised to hear, but it's about how long am I using this device, at what distance. Do you know Nick Pinault?
No.
The EMF guy, Nick Pinault. You know him? There you go, Nick.
You know Brian Hoyer?
I do. Yeah, okay. I had Brian's team come to my house back in the day. Yeah. So yeah, Brian's great. Brian and Nick actually taught a class together.
Okay.
So,
cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So they're on the same page with that. But that's what I use. I use their strategy, which is basically like distance, duration, and being aware of the ones that are what your non-native EMF environment is like in the places that you spend the most time. So for example, if I'm driving a car for a living, I want that car with like manual windows, I basically.
Is that how your car is?
It used to be.
It's so hard to find cars like that now. Like all of them are, dude. They're so bad now. They're so bad.
I know. But again, you do the best you can, right? And so I know. I remember this is a car, two cars before the one that I currently have, before I had a bigger family, and it was like this little Ford Focus, and there was like two on the lot that were within my price range. And they were like, well, here's the one with all the bells and whistles. And I was like, nope, give me the manual.
They're probably looking at you like, what?
Yeah, they're like, are you crazy? But like, no, I mean, I wanted that one. And so, so if I was driving a car for a living, I'd maybe be aware of that. If I was on the computer for a living, which I am on the computer a decent amount, right, these days, my space is hardwired. If I'm using a cell phone, I try to use it on it. So it's just being aware of it. I will like the idea of I'm never going to put a laptop here. Never, it's
I'm
just
literally putting this on my lap right now. I need to not do that.
You can put that thing on airplane mode.
Yeah, I could. I usually do, actually. I need to do that right now.
But the thing is that going to make it or break it for you for your health journey? No, because you do enough other things as well, right, to just support it. But it's just this awareness. And so I think it's just kind of a sane approach to understanding that technology and non-native EMFs are a part of our lives. At the same time, too, I've got things in my living space at home that can harmonize my environment.
Do you have a lot of red lights around?
I don't. I have a differing opinion on that than most biohackers do.
Oh, let's hear it, please.
I don't mind red lights, right? But we were never designed to be around mono lighting like that, right? Campfire is super rich in infrared and still maintains a balanced spectrum. So I have the old school Edison style incandescent bulbs and, in table lamps throughout my house. I found red with some clients provoked anger. And I mean, right? Like they didn't like it. It was too jarring for them.
It's like an example of negative color therapy.
Exactly. And so it can work. Like it can be great for maintaining your circadian rhythm because it doesn't contain the blue light. But if you're not doing all red all the time at night, there's other ways that you could also support your circadian signaling, like using those incandescent bulbs. And the vast majority that I've tested, they flicker a bit, but not in the intense range that you're going to see with LEDs. So they're within the safe range of that. So yeah, I have a family too, right? And maybe we talked about it. How
do you approach this with your kids? Because I was talking to you about that off camera. Like, I love my kids so much, but my son specifically is so resistant to any of the things that I do. And we try to be very gentle. Like, first wake up in the morning, I'm like, hey, come stand on the grass with me. Let's look at the sun. This is awesome. And he's like, no. I think it's just because I ask. He's like, no. I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah. So when I first started into this, and it was before I connected with Sarah. I mean, other people like that I knew that were doing this.
How long have you been doing this, by the way?
Like living this lifestyle?
Yeah, circadian, like quantum.
Well,
biology.
I mean, my son, it's his birthday today. He just turned 13, my firstborn. So about 12 years now.
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't typically share it a ton, but his story is an interesting one too, where it wasn't just for me. He was developing really obsessive OCD and anxiety that I believe was a combination of certain injections he had received at the time, and along with the fact that our house wasn't grounded. The wiring in our house wasn't grounded.
Wow.
And
how do you check for that? Just hire an electrician to come look?
Yeah, or you can get like a $10 little meter, and it's got lighting on it, like 3 different lights on it, and you plug it into your outlets. And if it's grounded, the grounded outlet will show up. Like it'll light up. So it's a very easy thing to check.
Do you have to check every single outlet?
You do.
Oh, okay.
You can't assume that your 3-prong outlets are grounded.
Yeah.
We had some 2-prong out. We had a ton of 2-prong outlets. I just didn't know, right? You don't know. It was our first house as a family. I just didn't know. And we lived right next to a fire station that had a big old 4G at the time tower, right? So there's a lot of stuff there. And his nervous system was fried. Yeah. To the extent that we just repetitive questioning, anxiety, like, are you going to pick me up at school? Are you going to pick me up? We're talking about 3, 4, to the extent that a psychiatrist evaluated him and said, well, he's going to need to be medicated his whole life. And I'm like, no. I'm like, no, thanks.
Thank God you had the wherewithal to know back then.
At that time, I was more aware of lighting. I wasn't aware of non-native EMS. And that really what I became aware of that. And I mean, he is a thriving, amazing kid, like love it. But at the same time, I control what I can through the lens of a parent, right? Yeah. It's like their computers are hardwired. They're never going to wear AirPods when they're in my house, right? Things like that. We unplug the Wi-Fi router at night. I mean, there's certain things like that. So I control what I can. We dim the lighting. They're used to that. But as I was going into this, I didn't force anybody. I just started showing up with orange glasses on at a certain time of night. And that was that. Yeah. And I would say probably about 5 years ago now, all of a sudden my husband started asking for them at night. So just model behavior. He sees like, oh, wait, you used to have all these things and this joint pain, and now you're just getting better and better and better. So, so he started wearing them. And then I would say, as my son and him started watching, basically they would watch football at night, right? And so he was maybe around 9 and he started asking for them as well. Because I was like, Leon, if you're going to have him stay up with you, he really should be wearing these glasses. And my son took one look at this bright TV and he was like, oh, that's so much better, right? And so he started wearing them. Now that I don't have to say anything, like they could be out for a guy's weekend and I know that they're going to want them and put them on. So I modeled the behavior. My other kids are coming along too, but again, I do have a couple of personalities that are like, oh, you want me to drink structured water? Here's a glass of tap water, right?
Literally, that's what happened to us last night. That exact thing. Like we went to a restaurant, we brought our own water as we always do. And just because of that, my son was like, I want that one. Yeah. We're like, all right, dude.
And so I'm of the opinion to model it, right? Just model it, model it, because otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, it happens. I've shown my son some of the abilities that other kids have, that he has the opportunity to learn those abilities too. Blindfolded reading being one of them. And I know like several families whose kids who do that. Cool, yeah. And like shown him some of the things that I've been able to do with Qigong, and he's still just like not interested. So I just guess I got to continue to just model it.
Model it. Yeah.
It's a tough one. It's a tough one when you're raising kids and you want them, they have to discover it themselves. They do.
They do. Yeah, they absolutely do. It's this fine line as a parent of being like, I mean, my kids know what, even my 5-year-old, they know what propaganda is, right? But at the same time, I'm not going to ruin their childhood.
Right.
Right? Like that, this particular musician that you're listening to isn't my favorite human being on the planet, but I get why you like the catchy tunes.
Yeah, that's all right. Right? That's right. And it's like how obviously those things might be imbued with negative, subtle frequencies and things like that. But how much is your own like joy that you're experiencing related to that overacting any of those negative things coming off those songs, as an example?
Well, yeah, I mean, the studies on the nervous system of the parent really dictating the nervous system of the kids, it's like, so yeah, exactly. I'm aware, but there comes a point where it's like, yeah, if you want to swim today in that chlorinated pool and just have a blast, go for it. Show me your biggest cannonball, right? Yeah. As opposed to like, oh no, chlorine.
Right, exactly. My wife told me, I don't know if you've ever heard this, that if you put coconut oil on your skin prior to getting into chlorinated pools, it helps block some of that from being absorbed.
Yeah, I've heard that. I haven't tested a ton. Again, I've got a couple of that are.
You have 300 things that you want to test. You need a lab.
Yeah, I do. Do you know what? This is a good time to mention that the Quantum Biology Collective is now the Institute for Applied Quantum Biology, basically taking this stuff and teaching practitioners. And they're going to be starting a nonprofit for research. Right.
Incredible.
So that's the thing. It's like, let's raise the money and give it to those researchers we know are dying to do that same stuff that we want them to do, but don't have the funding because it's not mainstream.
Incredible. Yeah, please support that. I'll throw a link in the show notes for that. Thank you. That's incredible. Okay, so let's cover, I think, one of the last things related to water. Covered all the ways that our bodies can stay hydrated outside of actually drinking water. How much importance do you put on drinking water? And then second part to that is, what is your approach to water, let's say when you're at home versus when you're traveling, as you are right now? And I'd like to preface this by saying that if anyone watching or listening hasn't checked out Dr. Cowan's video on what he does with his water at home, it's pretty incredible. Like the intention that he puts into his water. And
he has an actual Schauberger like vortexing unit, right?
Yes. I think so. I think it's a Schauberger vortexing unit, but he has like this whole thing, the prayer, like a lot of steps. And then I've interviewed Isabel Friend, and she has this prayer that
you've interviewed her. She's great.
Yeah. And she has this prayer that she prays over her water, which is incredible. So yeah, I just love to hear your take on hydration.
Yeah, sure. So number one, I can actually trust my thirst mechanism these days because I drink the good quality water.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I think, have a downregulated thirst mechanism because their body creates this association between, oh, every time I tell you you're thirsty and you drink water, you fill me with heavy metals and fluoride.
Yeah.
Right. So you can start to down. And so I think a lot of people, if they've been traditionally drinking tap water, they can't necessarily rely on thirst. And so that's number one. And number two, and the other thing too is, like you were alluding to before with your water fasting, if you're peeing all the time, you're not drinking the water that your body wants, right? And so that's another one as well. But for me personally, I'll hydrate first thing in the morning when I wake up. We can talk about the water that I drink. But with other people, I think that they need to just start becoming more intentional about sipping water throughout the day, not chugging it, but sipping water all throughout the day.
That's what I was taught to do for my water fast is just sip slowly throughout the day.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that it forces you to be present too, because you have to have the wherewithal to know, okay, I should probably drink a little bit of water right now and just sip throughout the day.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Exactly it. So like having your glass of water in a prominent place or a couple glasses of water in some prominent places where it might catch your attention. The other thing too is the vast majority of people are not metabolically flexible. So those people, which is a way that I would say you can burn both fat as a fuel source and carbohydrates as a fuel source, right? You can bounce back and forth because we're going to turn the electrons in those sources into water in the mitochondria. And so you make about 4 times more metabolic water burning fat than you do burning carbohydrates. But a lot of people are only in that sugar burning, that carb burning pathway. So they're just making less water throughout the day. Yeah. They need to drink more water. Most of us don't live in nature, right? And so we're in these high non-native EMF environments where we're being dehydrated and depleted because of that. So people do need to start to drink more water. The vast majority are chronically unintentionally dehydrated. And so that being said, then, what kind of water do we need to drink? Well, I would always say do the best you can, right? Because even a prayer will transform your water. I mean, bar none, right? Yep. So if you can get spring water, that spring has been tested, beautiful. I love it. Spring water is fabulous. But even then, I still think you should say a prayer because that spring water, let's say it was harvested in a community that's
what if it's by a golf course?
Yeah, exactly. Let's say it's toxin free, but let's say the energetic quality of the space that it's being harvested, right? Yeah. It's next to this construction plant or whatever it is, right? So I still think that you could energize that water with prayer. And so if you can harvest it, great. Energize it still with prayer intention. The next one would be if you have to take tap water and transform it, filter it. Mm-hmm. Right? Let's get rid of the toxins. My preferred way is typically reverse osmosis, right? Reverse osmosis filtration.
I have an RO system too, and I've heard people say that they highly suggest not using RO because it is depleting the water of the essential minerals that are naturally in the water. And I've also heard other people say that the mineral content of the water isn't necessarily that big of a deal as long as you find a way to bring it back into coherence.
Yeah. Great points. I love those. I think what we want to do is find a filter that removes the vast majority of toxins. And unfortunately, that means it's also going to remove potential minerals that are potentially biologically important.
Right.
And so the two methods that I would have people do are typically reverse osmosis and or distillation, mm-hmm. right? So basically you're starting with a clean slate in terms of the qualitative, like the quality of the chemicals or lack thereof in the water. It says nothing to do with the structure of the water. But I do then have clients add minerals back to their water, whether it's quinton, whether it's some fulvic-humic-based minerals. I like a
Celtic sea
salt, a Soleil, right? A natural mineral blend, like a broad spectrum mineral blend derived from nature. And we're talking a couple of drops, right? What I think the argument there is, well, spring water has minerals, but they're inorganic. Your body's not going to need those. You're not absorbing those minerals. Well, right. Those are not necessarily the minerals that the body needs to use, right, for biological purposes per se, although there's some evidence to indicate otherwise.
Wait, are we talking about the minerals in spring water naturally, or are you talking about like...
Well, the argument that I typically hear... No, yeah, from spring water.
Minerals from spring water, okay.
Typically from spring water, I hear, well, those are rocks. Like you're basically just consuming tiny rock minerals and your body doesn't need those. But the minerals in water aren't necessarily actively contributing a great deal to our mineral status, right? Again, that might be why we need food.
Yeah.
But it's helping our body absorb the water.
Yeah.
It imparts a little bit of charge or a little bit of, basically it gives a more natural signature to the water so that our body
I was just about to say that. I wonder if it's also that it is imbuing the water with frequencies from the earth.
Yeah, exactly. So the body says, oh, yeah, I know what this is. I want to pull it in, right? I'm not just going to send it straight to my kidneys.
Right.
And so, so then I'll have clients remineralize it. So filter, remineralize. And then at that point, I want them to, create some structure or energize it or, it harmonize it. There's a lot of different words for it.
Yeah.
And that can be something like an analemma wand. It could be, some
Mayu, vortexing
exactly,
device.
Mayu, some of Vedic. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done for that. There's various coasters, various coasters you can put them on. But I always say, when in doubt, I believe that one's own energy and intention, not only is it going to rearrange the bonding in the water molecules themselves to this beautiful geometry, but it's going to be more biologically resonant to the individual. Yeah. It's like please allow this water to provide me with the utmost qualities that my body needs right now in this given moment in time, right? And so it's like if you can start to do that, you're able to then give the water structure, re-energize it. So you have the structure, the energy, and that intention also becomes a tuning fork essentially to help bring your body back into alignment.
It's like you giving yourself a homeopathic dose of whatever it is that you want.
Totally.
It's important that you brought that up because I find myself doing this sometimes where I know all this stuff that we're talking about, and yet, and I want to preface this by saying I love the analemma wand. Like, very big fan of the analemma wand and the research that they've published. They're doing incredible stuff, and it is pretty amazing that it seems to be that because of their mother water, when you bring your water into coherence, it does not break its coherence after being around even like a 5G tower or something like that, which is incredible.
It's amazing, yeah.
With that being said, I think that in general, we can become too reliant on devices, thus forgetting our own power, also making it so we are almost, at least I'll speak for myself, disassociative. Because like at times, for example, when I'm in a hurry, I'm just like, fucking, okay, is that 40 seconds yet? Okay, I'm done. 40 seconds of stirring instead of being like, wait, why don't you just pause and breathe for a second, dude? Mm-hmm. Hold your water to your heartbeat. You're putting all of your attention in this analemma wand, which yes, is doing great things for your water, but what are you lacking for yourself in that moment that you could be doing by just, okay, yes, I've had a busy day, like kids, all the things going on. Let's just pause for a moment, bring our water to our heart.
Yes.
Like, don't try to force it. It has to be a real feeling, because water knows when you're lying, and you have to get yourself to a state of coherence so that you can put that coherence into your water, and then the water can put that coherence back into you. And it's like this upward spiral or continual expansion in this relationship between you and water.
Yeah.
And maybe do both, do the analemma and that.
Right. I've seen it go both ways for sure, both in my life and just with clients. Is like the analemma wand is the gateway for them to realize, oh, I can do this with my own intention, right? It's like a gateway drug for it in a good way to understanding your relationship with water. And the other one versus that would be like, oh, let me just really quickly, like you said, stir this up and get it. And so, I would say, if at all, if you don't have your analemma wand, that's okay still, right? It's okay because this, I would say, and I would imagine that Dolph and Mari, I would imagine that even the analemma people would appreciate the concept of my own intention is very powerful when it comes to supporting that water. So.
Mari and I talked about that on an episode we did recently. He did acknowledge that, and he would, he would fully acknowledge.
Yeah, that. And their analemma wand is really cool. Have they done any controlled experiments using just the quartz crystal?
No. And that's I know, I won't name names. Another individual whom I'm good friends with that is extremely knowledgeable on water, let's say, is convinced that it's just the quartz crystal in that is bringing the water into coherence at that level. But it is interesting. You would have to do a controlled study, but it is interesting that the water, once it is impacted by the mother water, seems to maintain its coherence even through being exposed to non-native EMFs and things like this. So that is an interesting point, but it also, just like you said, could be just a function of the quartz crystal. I know that the quartz crystal itself plays an incredibly important role because it's essentially acting as the transmitter of this more strong coherent field that is the mother water to impact your own water.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, but quartz crystals are their own. They can store energy and information as well, right? So
that's why our phones use quartz. I think they use quartz crystals. Pretty sure they do.
Silicone, yeah.
Okay, type of. Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. So yeah, it would just be interesting to see. I would love that. For me, would be like the icing on the cake in their research, just to kind of see. But I love what they're doing with structured water, and who cares? At the end of the day, they've developed this beautiful wand that really improves the quality energetically of the water that someone's drinking. So I think that's fabulous.
Net positive.
Net positive, exactly.
We haven't talked about fascia at all, and I know that's another thing that you're super big on. So let's go there.
Yeah,
you call it like a crystalline matrix, right?
Yeah, it's like our liquid crystalline matrix, or I call it, or our connective tissue superhighway, right?
Okay.
So this ties in my experience as an athlete and as a massage therapist. So after I graduated from my undergraduate degree, I was supposed to, right? I graduated at the top of my class, and I was supposed to go to med school or grad school, right? I also had the opportunity to be a high school biology teacher, and none of them.
Could you imagine that path for your life? Like that version of you?
I student taught, right? Just test it out for a semester. And I was like, don't you think dissecting this worm is so cool? And they were like, no, right? I was like, okay, never mind. This is not for me. And so I was called to go to massage therapy school, which is interesting because I'd never had a massage in my life. And so I basically went to massage therapy school, and it was there that I started physically interacting with other people's connective tissue through things like acupressure. And what I began to realize is, as I would feel the client's body and there would be certain knots in it, I would sink my thumb into a knot, and all of a sudden you I don't know if have you ever done this with anyone or ever experienced this, but like you find a knot, let's say next to someone's shoulder blade, and you push the finger in until it reaches what almost feels like a rock. It's like solid glass there. And then if you wait long enough, it starts to soften. Yep. And as it softens, you sink again to another layer, and you feel that hard spot again, soften. And as the tissues would soften, sometimes, not every session, but sometimes I would get a flash of a memory, or I would feel physically nauseated or something like that, or like my body temperature would change drastically. And at first I was just like, I'm going crazy. But then I started to ask the clients to be like, well, were you ever in a car accident? Or what, just the things that were popping up. And it was like, well,
oh wait, so you were getting a flash of it on their body.
Yes. Whoa. Yes. And so
I've heard it the other way. I've also heard it that way, but I didn't know that's what you were describing.
That's what I was picking up on, right?
Wow.
And so that's when I tucked that away just to be like, no one's been able to explain this to me, but it's always been just something that I had. And as I started learning about water in our bodies and how we're this interconnected highway of water, basically, and a vast majority of that water is around our connective tissue, our fascia, I started to realize, and water holds memory, right? I started to make this connection of, oh my gosh, as I'm changing the hydration level of a tissue by helping it to create or hold more water. We can talk about the physiology behind that. As I'm softening this tissue, we're releasing stuck memories.
Yeah.
Literally. Interference fields, right? And so
it makes sense too, because when you look at Veda Austin's work with water, Dr. Masaru Emoto's work with water, I think it's become crystal clear that water is reflecting back to us in some way what it is picking up in its environment.
Totally.
And if we're made of water, then that's where our memories are stored.
Yeah. Largely. Yeah. I think I think we have memory in the water and the field, right?
Yeah,
I think
both.
they're images of each other, right? And the water is an antenna for that field memory. But so this was really a new appreciation for me. It was just like, okay, so if areas that are stiff are kind of walled off, it's almost like it creates what's called an interference field. So let's say you have had a trauma in the body, and the fascia then will respond to that trauma, both energetic traumas and physical traumas, by kind of tightening off, walling off, creating a knot, if you will. Some of the knots can be physically felt. Some of them are just at such the microscopic level. But when fascia becomes dense and tight, it's dehydrated. It's essentially taken the water out of it, and it's kind of walled itself off. And so as you hold what's called compression into a point that's dense fascia. You're essentially just holding a spot for an extended period of time. Typically at the 2 to 5 minute mark, it starts to soften. And what's happening at that moment in time is that fascia is producing hyaluronic acid. And hyaluronic acid is this molecule that can hold, I think it's like 1,600 water molecules. It basically imbibes the tissue back with water.
Whoa.
And as you pull water into this tissue, you're allowing, it's not about forgetting the memory. You're allowing the trauma to move again. It comes into your field. It comes into your physical body through the water and out through your field. At least this is what I've intuited. It's like it comes in through your physical body and then goes back out through the field. And there can be distortions in the field and distortions in the physical body. And you're not going to spiritually bypass anything. But when it gets lodged or distorted and stuck, either in the physical or in the field, that's where the dissonance is created.
Right.
And depending on where that is, it could be across the meridian line. It could be in a physical organ itself. That can start to manifest then, right?
I mean, that's what Eileen has found with the human biofield anatomy, that, for example, off of your left shoulder is where if you've experienced grief and it's grief related to a certain point in your life, let's say you're 30 years old and the grief you experienced was when you were like 8 or 9, a lot of grief, that'll be a little bit further away in your field, manifesting oftentimes as physical shoulder pain on the left side, but the distortion in the field is a little bit off of, like a little bit further to the edge of your field because it's further in the past.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
totally makes sense.
Perfect sense to me too. Yeah. And so that's where, again, this idea that the water is forming this interconnected highway that can store memories, right? And we want to kind of move that through by rehydrating the dense areas of fascia. And also that's also what I talked about earlier, where it's like, okay, so then I can strike my skin with infrared and it can funnel anywhere, or I can pull in Earth's energy and it can go anywhere it needs to. And so the integrity of the fascia, specifically the collagen is key here. But the integrity of the fascia also dictates my ability to, implode and distribute energy, either whether it's from the field or whether it's from the earth or whether it's from sunlight. So my fascial system also needs to be intact in order for that system to be complete.
Have you ever explored Rolf therapy or just like myofascial release therapy?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts of those?
Yeah, I think they're great.
I've heard of people doing Rolf and their like whole personality changes afterwards.
It does, right? Because all of those, and it doesn't have to be, Rolfing is intense. Some myofascial therapies are intense. They don't have to be. You can do craniosacral, right? You can do some more really subtle therapies as well. But at the same time, 100%, right? Because if you're all of a sudden changing how the energy can flow and redistribute itself, you're changing the energetic status of the body, right? Doesn't it make sense that then you can manifest into a different version of yourself?
Totally makes sense. Yeah.
Right? And so again, what are the things that are really destroying the integrity of our connective tissue? Fluoride, glyphosate,
all the things we just mentioned.
Right? I mean, and so again, just being aware of these exposures is going to be important. But the really cool part about the collagen itself is people are familiar with the double helix, right? Because that's what DNA looks like in some instances of DNA.
Thank God you said that.
But then the collagen is a triple helix.
Uh-huh.
And when a bunch of triple helical bundles of collagen can form, when 7 of them can form, so picture like these triple helical bundles, almost like a rope, right? Like a rope that's twisted around each other. When 7 form, so essentially the center and 6 petals around it, right? When you have these bundles together, water nanotubes can form. And these water nanotubes are special because this is water that takes on a property where it can funnel energy and information faster than the speed of light, right? Whoa. This is really, truly high-speed communication in the body happening because of being in these confined spaces. The water all of a sudden becomes like a superfluid, if you will. And so we want to maintain that collagen in order to be able to have this instantaneous communication, not only inside of our bodies, but also from what we're receiving from the outside, and then having that instantaneously communicated. You're going to be on the same page as me with this, right? But like lock and key receptor stuff makes no sense, right?
Totally makes zero sense.
There's got to be a different way that the body pulls in information, funnels it. And one of the main ways is through water in these confined
That's what I always
bundles.
go back to is water. Like even talking about the ACE2 receptor, cannabis receptor, I don't like, maybe sometime in the future someone will come up with conclusive, irrefutable evidence that those things exist. Right now, I've yet to see anything. So I do, again, have to bite my tongue when anyone mentions some type of receptor that we have. That's okay. But for me, it all just makes so much more sense, bringing in the context of Gilbert Ling, Veda Austin, Gerald Pollack, Masaru Emoto, all these other people who are studying water. Our bodies are made of water. Water transmits and receives information, stores information, is able to reflect back, communicate, all these things. It's all just a function of the water in our bodies. Our bodies are 2/3 water by weight, and over 99% of the molecules in our body are water molecules. That's what's happening. It's the water.
Yeah, it is it for me too. And if we want to bridge the gap there to bring people who may still have that receptor model in their mind, you have to view it as a tuning fork effect, right? The water, if there are receptors, they don't exist by themselves. Everything is surrounded by water. And when something has a specific shape to it, it vibrates, it vibrates at a specific frequency, right? Which is why if I have a tuning fork tuned to A and I strike it, all the other tuning forks that have that same note, right, are going to start vibrating.
Right.
That's what's happening. And so what can happen with the water is the water is not receiving the right messages to understand it needs to be activated. The protein needs to be a certain shape. The receptor needs to be a certain shape, right? And so there may be receptors, but at the same time, it's not the presence of the receptor. It's always the water responding to the molecules inside of us. Yes, our body has molecules too, but the water dictates the geometry of those molecules and therefore the vibration they're putting out and their ability to then receive that same vibration and then facilitate physiology.
Yeah, we're 100% on the same page there. You mentioned the collagen thing, and you mentioned needing to maintain the health of the collagen in our fascial system. What would be some ways that we maintain the collagen health?
Well, movement's one for sure, right? If we're sedentary, we're going to lay down what's called basically cross-linked fascia. We're not going to lay down the nice collagen fibrils the way I was talking about. And so if we're sedentary, we have to take movement breaks. I love red light therapy for the collagen. I think it is really great, but sunlight, again, I've seen sunlight do amazing things to help support collagen. We do have to be hydrated. If we're dehydrated in there, they're not going to be conductive. And then just minimizing those toxins whenever possible. Getting myofascial release if you feel like you need it. There's some great practitioners out there, but I love self-myofascial release too.
What do you do for that?
I use softer. I know a lot of people who love like lacrosse balls and more dense foam rollers, but what I want people to realize is that the fascia is responsive to intensity. Right. So, for example, if I anticipated someone was going to come at me with a punch, my fascia is going to anticipate that, and it's going to kind of tense up a little.
Yeah.
And so, whatever tool you use, you have to be able to soften around it. Yeah, sure. Gua sha is great. There are some just softer rad rollers make some softer balls that I like as well. I mean, there's softer tools, even a tennis ball, something that's softer. And so it's like easing into it, easing and being gentle, and then taking the time to find spots in your body that feel energetically stuck, which to me feel they feel a little zingy, right? Not nerve zingy. They just feel a little, ooh, yeah. I
have 2 screws in my left shoulder and I'm so frustrated.
I've got 2 in my right.
Do you really? Yeah. What do you do for that? Because what surgery did you have?
A surgery they don't do anymore.
What is it?
It was one where they did cross burning. So they took a laser inside and they burned my actual capsule, my labrum.
Okay. So you didn't, I had biceps tenodesis, which is where they sever the bicep tendon.
They don't do that in women back in the day.
Dude, knowing what I know, I'm both happy that happened because I was able to get out of the army with disability. And I'm also really bummed because knowing what I know now, I would have never fucking in a million years done that. Like, it is insane.
I know.
Yeah.
No, it was.
I'm happy that you have. I don't want to say. I'm really happy that you have 2 fucking but I'm happy.
Did you have an ACL also at the same time?
Dude, not ACL, but I have my medial meniscus. I had surgery on that, and then I tore my MCL in my left knee the year after in high school playing basketball. It was all basketball injuries. Well, this one was handball, but basketball and handball injuries.
Volleyball. This was pickup basketball.
Pickup basketball. Dang, we're not even in a game. Was it in a league at least or no?
I play with a bunch of like football and basketball coaches at the college I used to teach at, right? And it was a non-contact one, right? Jump stop to get around this big dude and then try to go the other way for a layup. It just didn't work. But
no one crossed you up or anything and like
no, right? No. I got my pride still on that.
What position did you play?
This is, so I'm not tall.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I'm not tall, but I was always either a 4 or 5.
Oh, wow.
And an outside hitter in volleyball because I just had
Do you
leaps.
have bounce?
I got leaps. I had leaps. I still have some decent
Okay.
ups, right?
Okay.
But yeah, I could jump out of the gym and I could position myself for the rebound perfectly and in post moves. So yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I've had some fun playing sports my whole life. But yeah, but that being said, but what I think ultimately was the issue with my knee here, this knee was meniscus, ACL, MCL, PCL.
All?
Mm-hmm. It completely dislocated.
Oh
like
my
the
God.
whole thing just
from a jump stop?
Right. So
Wow,
that's
what
where I
the
said,
hell?
well, and my son my first was 2 at the time. So I'm in this quantum mindset. I'm like, what is going on?
Yeah.
He was a C-section. I had severed communication happening, right?
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Like my system my proprioception, my system just wasn't as coherent. I had sliding scars from softball, right? Some really, really great plays, right? Fun stuff, like good memories, if you will.
Yeah.
But like I actually had numb tissue below my knee as well. So I had numbness here, a C-section here. How the heck is my knee supposed to stabilize?
That makes a
Right?
lot of sense.
So yeah, I mean, just things now. And so now I know where where the screws are. I know where the points are that I need to tend to. And
how do you deal with your fascia related to that though? Because like for me, it's interesting because at the time of my shoulder injury, again, left shoulder grief, I was also going through a lot of grief because I was near my parents' divorce time too.
Uh-huh.
And I also had a high constitution for issues there because when I was 13, 14, there's a lot of grief because there's a lot of turmoil in my family. So like lots of left shoulder pain and then tore my bicep tendon, labrum and rotator cuff, had surgery.
Funny.
Yeah. And now I feel like, maybe I'm going to answer my own question. When I'm more stressed, I feel that adhere more versus when I'm more relaxed, my shoulder can release a little bit better.
Well, what's interesting is right side. I've had all of my injuries have been on the right side because I was too left-brained, right? And as I started to expand my awareness, it's rebalanced itself out, right? Like I've really been able to balance out, my analytical and my intuitive sides, but I was completely neglecting one, and my body was telling me, "You're neglecting." And so now I feel like I can tend to it with movement and with myofascial release, and every once in a while getting a massage and things like that. But no, my body has really rebalanced itself.
Amazing. Okay, so I have hope because I've been struggling with my.
Well, just a reminder, right?
Yeah,
it's a reminder.
It was interesting though. So I went into my water fast not with like insane physical health issues. This is also related to emotions. I'm 100% convinced. I don't know if you've looked into German new medicine yet, but there's been some things for me that have been uncanny. I had a separation conflict where I was breaking out in an insane rash only on the upper right part of my head related to my mother separation conflict, some stuff going on there, and was going into the water fast with a lot of left shoulder pain and right hip pain. After that 15 days, all of it was completely gone, like completely gone. Yeah.
Which is, beautiful. Obviously the physical minded person is going to say autophagy, but then the emotional person is going to realize that I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. Totally.
You're able to release a lot.
Deep sleep or in-REM sleep is crucial for our body's daily rejuvenation, repair, and overall well-being. And unfortunately, most people fail to get enough of this essential phase of sleep. It's responsible for some pretty crucial functions, including daily rejuvenation and repair, regulating cravings, weight loss, hormone balance, boosting energy, and more. And if you're not getting enough deep sleep, you may struggle with some of the issues that I listed. There are several factors at play, including things like non-native EMF exposure, artificial light exposure, and circadian dysregulation. But another big reason for a lack of deep sleep is magnesium deficiency. Over 80% of the population is deficient in magnesium, and magnesium plays a crucial role in our sleep, one of which is increasing gamma-aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which encourages relaxation on a cellular level. Magnesium also plays a key role in regulating your body's stress response, and when you're deficient, you tend to have higher stress levels, which, as you can imagine, doesn't exactly help with sleep. Now, before you go out and buy a magnesium supplement, it's important to understand that most products out there only have 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, when the reality is your body needs all 7 forms of this essential sleep mineral. That's why I recommend Magnesium Breakthrough. Magnesium Breakthrough from Bioptimizers contains all 7 forms of magnesium designed to help calm your mind, help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up feeling refreshed. The deep sleep benefits when you get all 7 forms of magnesium through Magnesium Breakthrough are really noticeable. And as I've shared before, I don't take a lot of supplements, nor do I promote a lot of supplements, but this is one supplement that my family is regularly using. And there's a reason that this is a best-selling product for Bioptimizers. For an exclusive offer, go to bioptimizers.com/Alec, or just head to the show notes and use promo code ALEC10 during checkout to save 10%. And if you subscribe, not only will you get amazing discounts and free gifts, you will also make sure your monthly supply is guaranteed. Okay, so as you know, and this is going to relate to the Biofield, I am a proponent of the understanding that there is no empirical evidence that disease is spread via the fluids of a sick person. I've interviewed Daniel Roitas, who just released a book, Can You Catch a Cold?, where he looked at over 200 contagion studies throughout history and found that the modal number, meaning the most frequent, the occurring number, was 0 incidents of contagion across these studies. There was examples in which people did get sick after being in contact with sick people or exposed to their fluids, but in virtually, if not exclusively, all of those examples, that could be attributed to the placebo-nocebo effect. None of them were double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled. And in some of the cases, as an example, saline placebo, more people became sick after being exposed to that than being exposed to the fluids of a sick person. So that's where I'm coming from. You're nodding your head, so I think you're very much on the same page. So this might be a bit of a rhetorical question for you, but it'll be helpful nonetheless for the audience. Do you think that, so you're a parent just as I am, and I have seen countless examples where my son will get sick just after my daughter. They're eating completely different things. Yes, they're living in the same environment, and we seriously downplay the effect of living in the same environment, exposed to the same toxins, if you will, right? Both metaphysical and physical toxins. But I've just seen things where it's so uncanny, where, as an example, my kids, one will get sick right after the other with very specific symptoms. Let's say like what would be colloquially known as hand, foot, and mouth symptoms. Sure. This happened. Then my niece was over just for a little bit, and then about a week later also manifested symptoms of hand, foot, and mouth that were like identical symptoms, right? And again, I want to emphasize there is 0 evidence that fluids from a sick person actually demonstrably cause disease in a healthy person by way of a pathogenic particle or microbe. With that being said, it's like, this is pretty interesting. I've heard other people say this same thing over and over again. Do you think that is both a function of the biofield and water, or just what are your thoughts on that in general?
I think it's both. I mean, they're reflective of each other, right? What's going on in our water is reflected in our biofield and vice versa. The non-touching part, let's say non-fluid exchange, like how could these symptoms appear in me and then appear in you, right? Our biofield is just like this sphere, if you will. It's a container, right? It's literally a plasma container around us. It has its own membrane, which I'm sure Eileen has talked about many times, right? And anytime inside of a container you emit different types of waves or frequencies, you create what are called standing waves. And so what I describe this as for people is when you look at patterns called cymatics, right? And so anyone can Google cymatics or put it up on YouTube and you'll see different things. And you'll see the one that I love in particular would be the cymatic, or the geometrical pattern that you see in water when you pick up the frequency of a cancerous cell versus the frequency of a healthy cell, right? And so let me talk about what cymatics is so that people who are listening can understand this. So to visualize cymatics, you take a frequency and cells make sounds. This is James Jabjewski, right? This is his research out at UCLA. It's obviously too quiet for us to hear, but all of our cells are emitting sounds that if we amplify them, they're audible to us. And so he saw that, okay, let me take the sound from a cancerous cell and isolate it. Let me take the sound from a healthy cell and isolate it. And then what he did was he started to play it, and he realized that one sounded kind of a little bit more dissonant than the other. Well, then fast forward to people like John Stewart Reed, who study cymatics. What John does is John basically takes a petri dish of water and a vibration platform. And he puts that petri dish of water on this vibrating platform and shines a light above it. And you can program this vibrating platform at any frequency. And when you program it to vibrate the sound of the healthy cell, the water in this petri dish moves in standing waves, it's called, and it starts to create a very coherent, organized geometry. And that coherent, organized geometry is synonymous with like, okay, that is an organized system. That is a system who knows itself and can withstand that, can sustain that energy. When he put the frequency of the cancerous cell into it, it was very amorphous, right? There was no really true standing wave geometry. It was very amorphous. It looked sickly.
Wow.
So translate that to all of a sudden my body, it needs to purge something, right? It's going through a seasonal cycle of needing to detoxify. Well, that frequency is my cells. My cells are emitting that frequency of got to detoxify. It's going to change the standing wave energy in my biofield, this 6 feet or whatever you want to call it around me. So all of a sudden, it's likely greater than that, right? But all of a sudden I come into contact with you and now you're in my biofield in the same way that water can get entrained, right? We can entrain with it. We're sharing the energetic qualities of it. Right? We're not sharing necessarily anything physical, but I am a standing field. I am a physical sphere, right? That has energy that's contained within it. And so that's what I think is being picked up. People say even things like, well, how do you talk about like the fact that I wash my hands all the time and I get less sick than you? Well, it's like, well, why would I wash my hands after a massage therapy session? It's not from the germs. It's the energetic pollution.
Oh,
I don't need that energy in my field, right? And so it's a very similar thing. It's not about the quote unquote germs that are on my hands. It's about clearing that person's energy out of my field so that I don't have that as part of my standing waves anymore. So yeah, that's kind of how I picture it. And it's not necessarily bad. I think it's how I picture cycle syncing as well,
yep.
Right?
Totally.
And it has nothing to do with how we're physically sharing anything. It's our energetic sharing.
Veda did a series of experiments with free-range eggs and caged eggs, where she had a free-range egg, which when she cracks open the egg, takes the liquid runny part of the albumin, freezes it. Using her freezing method, she finds that the crystallography in that egg typically shows all 6 patterns that are common to healthy eggs. And it's just these beautiful geometric patterns. Versus a caged egg, when she does the same thing, it'll typically only show 1 to 2 of those 6 available patterns in eggs that she sees common to eggs. And sometimes it shows none. And it's just like in a total state of discoherence, sort of just representing the energy that has been imbued into these eggs, where a chicken is raised in a way that it's doing exactly as what chickens are supposed to do, not being pumped with hormones, antibiotics, etc., living in cages, crowded amongst other chickens in a perpetual state of fight or flight, maybe under fluorescent lights, etc., etc. But then the caged egg represents all of that negative stuff, right? And she'll take that, she's done this a number of times, she'll take the free-range egg, surround it with 10 or more caged eggs, and just by being in proximity to the free-range egg, the caged eggs, when cracked and their albumin frozen with the freezing method, display much more coherence. And the free-range egg itself, when frozen, is unimpacted. And how I like to relate that to what you just said with the human body is when we're coming from the paradigm that symptoms themselves are bad and that germs are causative agents in illness, of course, when we see multiple people getting sick in the same space, we're going to be fearful of that and want to suppress it or cut it off in every way that we can. It's an erroneous thought pattern, in my opinion, like absurd thought pattern. When you bring in the context of chicken eggs, and apply it to our bodies, which I understand is a leap to say for sure that applies to us, but I would say largely that it does, right? It's that when because I'm immersed in this environment, or because humans have the ability to co-create this reality in ways that are different than what animals can do, right? We have just a little bit more awareness. That can be a blessing or a curse. Repetitive negative thoughts accompanied by these toxic way of living gets our body to a threshold of toxicity where at a point it desires to come back into coherence, which is why we detoxify and have these unpleasant symptoms. So if we're in community with other people who are experiencing the same thing, just as you said, it's our bodies trying to come back to coherence, simply communicating to the bodies of people around us, hey, if you've reached this certain threshold of toxicity, it may be time for you to come back into coherence too. And it's not a bad thing.
Right.
Just as these caged eggs are attempting to come back into coherence by being around the free range egg, our bodies are doing the exact same things. That's what I think, at least.
Yeah, I resonate with that so deeply. I agree completely. And, you know, I also go back to that idea of the biofield and the state of mind that I'm in. And it's like, yes, I might have physical toxins, but physical toxins don't necessarily have to negatively affect people either. There's a whole other layer of that as well, you know? And so that goes into the status of like, is my biofield, am I imploding the ether in a way that brings me back into self-organization, right? And I don't need to necessarily address the physical toxins at this time.
Because your body will naturally detoxify in the background without even knowing if your body is in such a strong state of coherence, which is why I just interviewed Joel Schaefer about this. He was talking about shamans. They don't give a shit what they eat. Once they're at a certain point, it doesn't fucking matter because they're in such a strong, coherent state. It doesn't matter what they eat. Their body detoxifies all that like clockwork.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I feel the same way.
Okay. So as like a last concept, I want to kind of put all of it together in asking how you think the exclusion zone and water in our cells, our fascial system, and the biofield all interact to express how our bodies express.
Yeah, sure. And so
that's a big question. I know that.
Well, no, it's a great question though. It's a great question. So first and foremost, all of the water inside of our body is designed to be structured, right? And so it's differing types of structure though. When it's near those biological surfaces, like the cell, inside of the cell, around the mitochondria, or with the connective tissue, it's structured into that exclusion zone status. When it's flowing through our bloodstream or our cerebrospinal fluid, it's also structured. It's just more fluid. It has more of the structured, like we would talk about the coherent water, right? And so it's all structured, and it's all actually liquid crystalline water, just to varying degrees of viscosity. And so liquid crystals have been studied forever in physics, right? They're a very common way that the tech industry stores data, is an antenna, transmits things. And so if we have to start viewing our bodies just basically as this liquid crystal, and what can I do to maintain this liquid crystalline status? And then what energy and information am I feeding this liquid crystal? And that is basically also going to be, that will determine basically how well I'm imploding life force energy from the ether. Also, we can also, at some point, we can talk about how the ether is gravity and how it implodes as gravity. But that's maybe for a completely different topic, charge implosion. But
that sounds very Walter Russell-esque.
It is. This is Dan Winter. But yeah, it is very Walter Russell-esque.
Okay.
Charge, yeah. But anyway. But anyways, that being said, it's like that basically, how is our physical body able to receive the information around us? How are we what physical information is it? How are we interacting with it? How well can we flow that energy and information? Is it getting stuck in any points and causing dissonance? And then if it is, that then can manifest as symptoms, right, as we talked about. And so it's all about maintaining this liquid crystalline body that can flow and interact and pull in and flow. And the way that I interact then with my own physical body and the world around me in a state of compassion, peace, whatever it might be, right? Those are ideal: gratitude, compassion, peace. That also then dictates the quality of how I'm taking energy in, distributing it throughout my body, and then circling it throughout my biofield. It dictates the quality of the standing waves in this plasma biofield as well. It dictates how I can pull in energy through the chakra system. Like there's so many different ways that we can talk about this, but it all comes down to the fact that we are these liquid crystalline water bodies continually interacting with what's happening inside of us and the world around us. And so that empowers me to be like, okay, let me keep this crystal as pure as I can, right? Let me keep it charged. Let me be aware of my lighting environment. Let me be aware of my, who I interact with, what I watch on the news. Just let me be aware of those sorts of things. And health doesn't have to be that complicated. We really can simplify it to that status right there, because we are literally antenna. Because this liquid crystalline status, we're literally antenna for all the information around us. So choose wisely, choose your information wisely. You know, I mean, it's fairly simple.
And the overwhelming majority of solutions are totally free and readily accessible just in your environment.
They are, you know, they really are, because as biological creatures, we're designed to resonate with nature, right? And so sounds of nature, even though subjectively they might be a little annoying to you, but they literally create standing waves, either as cymatic imprints in our body, or in our biofield that are biologically resonant, right? Like our body knows what to do. If our body is surrounded by the information that it knows, it doesn't become threatened, right? So that dictates the status of my nervous system, which plays a huge role then in other physiological responses happening in my body and vice versa, right? So then as my body is responding, it's responding in a state of, oh, okay, right? And as I'm gathering in information, my body's like, oh, okay. And it can come into alignment. The human body's not stupid, Alec, right? It's not trying to hurt us.
It's brilliant.
Right? It's not trying to hurt us. This goes, it's like the whole autoimmune thing. I mean, it's like the body is not out to get you.
Thank you so much for saying that. I cannot stand when people say that autoimmune diseases are the examples of the body attacking itself. No. Absurd. Literally absurd.
And dehydration plays a key role in that as well, with how the body breaks down the cellular parts to begin with. So, I don't know. I mean, to me, a lot of people say, oh, it's too pie in the sky, you know, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I've seen it in my own body. I've seen it in countless others. And you have to believe, right?
Yeah.
You have to believe, and you have to make some commitments to understanding your body and the world and how you interact with the energies in this way. But when you do, you become really your own healer, and you don't have to outsource yourself to any guru.
Amen. So well said. Okay. Could you share any just things you're working on right now, courses you're about to do, summits, or just things you have going on with your whole brand?
Yeah, sure. My brand. Isn't that so fun? It's so funny.
I know. It's funny to say that. I know.
So silly. I know. It is true though. Yeah, I do have a brand apparently.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks. Well, number one, my favorite thing to do is teach, right? I have courses for, if it's just someone's listening, they want to learn how to apply this to their own physical bodies. And yes, I've got courses where it's, you know, for anxiety and depression, or for thyroid, or for adrenal, because really to get people's awareness, they have to see their pain points.
Does it all come back to the same thing?
Yeah, but it all ultimately comes back to the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So there's several courses. There's courses for practitioners, both through what I teach on my platform, and also then a certification program and a board certification program through the Institute of Applied Quantum Biology, which is just a lovely organization. And so that's
who's like running that organization?
Meredith and Jason Oak.
Okay, I don't know them.
They had their own. Meredith had her own health challenges and stuff, and she really started to utilize light and fell into this whole line of quantum biology.
Cool.
And
incredible.
We around 2020. My gym shut down in 2020, right? And so I had to start teaching.
Was it a CrossFit gym, by the way?
No, it wasn't.
What type of gym was it?
Well, actually, it was a little bit of everything. It was more of a wellness facility. It was an old firehouse, a 100-year-old firehouse.
Cool,
yeah, I purchased and we transformed it. But yeah, so COVID shut that down, and I had to start putting stuff out there, and I started talking.
Government shut that down. COVID didn't shut that down.
I appreciate that language, which thank you. Thank you. And so
what's COVID?
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that, Alec. And so the government shut down my gym, and I had to, I decided to, I was kind of using this stuff for my own healing, but I hadn't put it out there. I was working with clients with light. And so I put it out on social media, and all of a sudden this woman reaches out to me, and she's like, Easy Water. And we want to, and so at that time there was no organized curriculum around this. Yes, there's articles and posts, and, there's podcasts, there was information out there, but nothing was ever organized into a really coherent curriculum. And so she was like, hey, let's do this. And so if people want to learn about light and water, and my courses talk about the Aether, right?
Yes.
Right. So to put it all together. So that would be another way to go, which is great. What else I do? Sarah and I are co-hosting a summit, right? So that'll be fun, really kind of breaking it down to health simplified, if you will, and so that's another thing. And if anyone just wants to interact, I have also, I don't know if you saw this, but I've recently made my courses pay what you choose.
I love that.
And part of it is because I started to cringe every time I opened like my Instagram to type up another post to be like, here's why I need to convince you that this course is worth this much money. right? And just to me, I was just like, this is so cringy. It just didn't resonate with me. So now it's just like, I get to teach, which is my joy, right? I get to educate you. I get to share this information with you. And hey, if you want to learn more, get it.
That's how our membership was up until recently. And it's because with our new platform, Voxel, we couldn't figure out how to integrate Stripe to have it be pay what you choose. But that's how it has been up until like literally right now.
Yeah, no,
such a bummer, because that's what I think
right?
That's what everything should. I won't say what other people should do. That's what feels best for me, is like, you pay what you feel that you're getting out of this by being a part of this community, this course, whatever. I think that's the best way to do it.
And no joke. I mean, the vast majority of people, with zero judgment on my part, choose low.
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? Because that might be where their needs are, their means are. It might be it's just for a whole host of reasons. But that doesn't bother me. Like, it's not like, oh no, my work is now being valued at this. It's like, no, oh good, my work has reached one more person. It's not my work. It's just me organizing what should be taught to every human being on the planet. It's just how I've organized it. I get to share that with other people. And so, I mean,
what a blessing.
It's a blessing. And I really encourage people to, if they want to dive deeper, just to get something, get started. I layer it out. And I always say, start with light and water. Those are the two ones, and once you get to light and water, you can dive deeper from there.
Awesome. Carrie, thank you so much for coming out for this. This was epic.
Yeah, thanks, Alec. I'm so excited. This was great. Thank you.